than in Ukraine. As we meet here, Ukraine is enduring ongoing massive attacks on its critical energy infrastructure. These are not accidents of war. They are not collateral damage. They are systematic, deliberate strikes designated to plunge civilians into darkness and cold. Russia is failing to win on the battlefield, so it is weaponizing winter. It is trying to manufacture a humanitarian catastrophe. Hospitals, water system, heating networks, homes, all are targets. The brutality is calculated. The objective is simple: to break the resilience of the Ukrainian people. But Russia has failed in that objective, and it will continue to fail because Ukraine does not stand alone. Europe stands with Ukraine. And Europe will increase pressure on Russia. Committing the most brutal crimes against Ukraine and its people comes with consequences. Last week we put forward the 20th package of sanctions. From the very first day, the European Union has mobilized unprecedented support to stabilize, repair and integrate Ukraine's energy system. And we continue to do so every single day. Our humanitarian response is strong. Since February 2022, the EU has provided 1.3 billion in humanitarian aid. Support will continue in 2026 with an initial allocation of 153 million, 145 for Ukraine and 8 for Moldova. Our winter response remains a core priority. We have allocated close to 350 million since the start of the war, including 40 million to prepare for the 25-26 winter. Because when energy systems are destroyed, it is really not only about the infrastructure, it is about people's ability to heat their homes, access water and keep hospitals running. At the same time, we are fully engaged in repairing, stabilising and modernising Ukraine's grid while advancing alignment with the EU acquis. This is not only emergency support, it is a strategic investment in Ukraine's future inside the European energy family. And we have delivered. The European Union is today Ukraine's largest energy donor. Since 2022, we have provided more than €3 billion in energy support alone. Under the Ukraine facility, we mobilised since last summer nearly €1 billion just for emergency gas purchases. Without this gas in storage, the situation this winter would be dramatically worse. Quite simply, families would not have been able to heat their homes. Through the EU Civil Protection Mechanism, we have delivered massive in-kind assistance. More than 11,000 generators, over 7,000 transformers and 6 auto-transformers. These are not just numbers, they mean electricity for over 9 million people. Since January this year alone, close to 1,000 RESC-EU generators have been mobilised, alongside hundreds more provided by participating countries. We are also channeling global contribution through the Ukraine Energy Support Fund, which has mobilised close to €2 billion to procure critical equipment and address urgent needs. The EU alone added €100 million specifically to enable repairs in the hardest hit regions. At the same time, we have strengthened cross-border solidarity. We increased electricity export capacity to Ukraine and Moldova to 2.45 gigawatts, up from 2.1 gigawatts last winter. And just last weekend, after the latest mass attack, this export proved decisive in keeping the Ukrainian grid stable. This is European solidarity in action. Yet, we must be honest, repairs alone are not enough. This is why long-term continuous support remains essential. Through the Ukraine facility, we are already supporting urgent repairs and accelerating decentralised generation. Local solutions that are harder to destroy and quicker to restore. We are coordinating closely with the international partners through the G7 plus Ukraine Energy Support Group, which we co-chair with France and which has mobilised more than €7 billion to date. And we are going further. The Commission has proposed a draft energy action plan for implementation ahead of next winter. It prioritises infrastructure protection, both active and passive, and combines this with deep structural reforms. Because resilience is not only about the equipment, it is also about governance. We are tackling the roots of corruption, building an independent regulator, reforming state-owned enterprises, and aligning Ukraine's legislation with the EU and energy community acquis. Our objective is clear: full integration of Ukraine into the European energy market through market coupling, accession support and regulatory alignment. Not temporary fixes, but lasting stability. Honourable members, all of this brings me to a crucial point. To truly protect Ukraine's energy system, we must also protect Ukraine's skies now. This means urgently delivering more air defence systems and missiles. We call on Member States to act without delay, including by drawing on national stocks where possible. Commissioner Kubilius is working with the European defence industry to remove production bottlenecks and speed up deliveries. To sustain this effort to secure Ukraine's energy system, protect it from further attacks and to prepare for the coming winters, the Commission has proposed a comprehensive package of €90 billion. This will help finance additional procurement and sustained capacity in crucial defence equipment. This proposal for a Ukraine support loan is essential. It is urgent and it must be adopted as soon as possible. We welcome tomorrow's vote here in the Parliament. This funding will strengthen Ukraine and allow us to accelerate reforms and integration. It will give Ukraine predictability, it will give investors confidence, and it will send a clear political signal that Europe's commitment is firm. Supporting Ukraine's energy security is not a charity, it is European security. A resilient Ukrainian grid strengthens our entire continent, and a stable Ukraine is central to our collective security. Russia wants darkness, Europe delivers light. Russia wants fear, Europe delivers solidarity. Russia wants destruction, we deliver reconstruction and reform. Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty, but also for the principles on which our union is built: freedom, dignity, and the rule of law. So let us match Ukraine's courage with European resolve. Let us continue to stand firmly with Ukraine this winter, next winter, and for as long as it takes. We together.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. On behalf of the EPP Group, Mr. Kaller.
President, dear colleagues, what the Russian aggressor cannot achieve is they're unable to achieve in military terms on the land, on the ground. They're trying to achieve this by attack infrastructure. This whole policy which shows disrespect for the people against international law. We've got thermal power plants, substations, water plants. These are just some of the targets. Schools, hospitals, blocks of flats, private residents, all being destroyed. I must say that I am amazed by the Ukrainian resolve and the emergency services doing all their rescue work and then trying to do the repair work of the grid and other elements of destroyed infrastructure and then dragging people out of the rubble. Thank you also to the Commission member states and the private initiatives across the whole of the European Union who have provided generators, clothing as a show of solidarity to the Ukrainian people. How can we bring the war criminals in the Kremlin to stop bombing and come round the negotiation table? You can only do this by putting them under military pressure and getting them to believe that they cannot win the war. We have to improve air defence systems and provide the necessary systems to Ukraine, because there are rockets and missiles that are further ranging, and these have to be deployed so that they can help the Ukrainians in order to incapacitate infrastructure in Russia, and also to make sure that the various rail and road hubs are unable to function. And that's when the war will end. Slava Ukraina.
On behalf of S&D Group, Mr. Rutten.
Thank you, President, Council, colleagues. Council is not here. That's a problem. Europe stands by Ukraine for as long as it takes. But after 4 years, are we really doing everything it takes to defend Ukraine? The scale of Russia's attacks on civilian infrastructure are unprecedented, and then we can underline and say, yes, these attacks are war crimes and barbaric state terrorism, Russia's approach to peace talks and the attacks are part of the same psychological warfare, and yes, member states are willing for the EU budget to pay for a critical loan. Yes, it's all true, but words and money are not enough. Ukraine needs real help now. Where is the European humanitarian assistance, the generators, the engineers? And why is there no air protection zone over West Ukraine, no Taurus missiles, additional Patriot batteries, or crisis ramp-up of our production? We must make sure now that standing by does not become bystander. Thank you.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím za skupinu Patrioti pre EU.
And now thank you, and on behalf of the Patriots, Mr. Ferenc. Mrs.
A fegyverek okozta pusztítás, az áramszünetek.
Thank you very much. Destruction by weapons, blackouts, unheated flats, and the extreme cold. All of this is leading to a humanitarian disaster. Believe me, I come from this near this part of the world, and the civilian population is suffering physically and mentally. We can only hope that peace comes, because peace will put an end to this, and anything else just creates harm. Right from the outset, Hungary has been condemning the Russian aggression. We're in favour of peace, but then we see that Hungary is being unjustifiably attacked. We support Ukraine. Here, this is a question of humanitarian support. We've already made €200 billion available to the Ukraine people, and we are helping Ukraine when it comes to infrastructure, to energy supply. About 40% of electricity and gas supply in the Ukraine comes from Hungary. And the Commissioner at costs, between you and me, perhaps I could address the issue of violations of human rights, forced recruitment, for example, which can sometimes be quite tragic. You yourself, Commissioner, have said that soldiers are being press-ganged, basically, forcibly recruited, and that is also a humanitarian crisis, and only peace can help. Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Dvorczyk now. Yes, thank you very much, President. Dear colleagues, the incessant attacks from Russia on energy infrastructure is a deliberate strategy to attack the civilians when it's very cold. The idea is to trigger a humanitarian crisis. So no electricity, no heating. This is a threat to life for millions of people, in particular for those who are sick, the children and the elderly. Right from the outset of the war, Poland has helped support the Ukrainians. We've had fundraising activities, and the money has been used to buy electricity generators, which have been sent immediately directly to the people living in blocks of flats and elsewhere, and the Catholic Church has also helped. Europe cannot react to the Russian attacks just with words. We need to have proper support for Ukraine energy infrastructure, humanitarian support, and more sanctions on Russia. Solidarity. We have to show solidarity to Ukraine, and this is the only way that we can show the credibility of the European Union as a loyal ally.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Austrevičiusa za skupinu Renew Europe. Nech sa páči.
Mr. Chair, Madam Commissioner, dear colleagues. Realizing it would not be able to break the spirit of the Ukrainian people with weapons, Russia resorted to tormenting them with cold and darkness. By destroying Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Russia is committing crimes equivalent to genocide and crimes against humanity, which must be judged by the special tribunal. In recent months, the Kyiv, Donetsk, Dnipro, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, Odessa and Mykolaiv regions were left without or very limited access to power, often just 2 hours a day, with temperatures well below -15. This constitutes a humanitarian crisis, a human suffering on a national scale. At the same time, we must acknowledge that as partners, the European Union, we have failed to provide Ukraine with the necessary support to protect its skies. Each Russian missile or drone that hits its target serves as a reminder of the broken promises. Despite hardships, Ukrainians remain united and resourceful in their fight. The dedication of Ukrainian energy sector workers in restoring energy supplies is commendable. However, all this requires significant financial and technical resources. Let's provide Ukraine with our support and as long as it will be needed. Thank you.
Ďakujem pekne a teraz poprosím.
Yes, thank you very much. And the floor now to Mr. Lagodinsky on behalf of the Greens.
Putin loves to tell stories about Hitler's crimes, about Leningrad's blockade when Nazis starved and froze to death a whole city. I will tell the story about Baba Zhenya. She was a Holocaust survivor. She survived Hitler. Putin froze her to death in her own apartment in Kiev this winter. The old woman escaped Holocaust, but she couldn't escape a genocide, Putin's genocide. Meanwhile, Orban is calling Ukraine an enemy to Hungary. Shame on you. Right-wing populists in this House are calling to make peace with Kremlin. Shame on you. Trump's White House is blackmailing Ukraine into an unfair peace. Shame on you. But we will not remember those. We will remember Baba Zhenya, and we will remember Ukraine as it is, and it will continue, that resists aggression and remains dignifying, even in age, even in tragedy, even in ice. We must provide defense system, Patriots and Iris, Taurus, Taurus, Taurus. Give Ukraine what they need. Give them tools, not words. And protecting heat, light and life is not a solidarity. You're right, Madam Commissioner. It is our strategy. It is a lifeline for Ukraine. Our lifeline.
Thank you, and while I'm motor on to the speakers for the groups, please don't overdo it. A teraz poprosím kolegu Stürze.
Now I'd like to give the floor to Syrsted on the left.
Herr talman.
President, what we are witnessing is terror. Every day, schools, hospitals, homes are being bombed in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are freezing in the cold winter. This is a way to torture a people, to humiliate them, to try to break them. Russia is not successful, though. Ukraine is fighting for its freedom, and the Ukrainian people are not bowing to the pressure. Our job is to stand by them, to send them more and better air defences, more generators to provide heat in this cold, and to finally implement tougher sanctions against the regime in Moscow. Far too many times, the world has allowed violence to triumph, and this time we must not allow it.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím.
Yes, thank you very much. And now I'd like to hand the floor to Volgin on behalf of the ESN.
4 години продължава войната в Украйна. For 4 years, the war in Ukraine has waged, and for 4 years, the leaders of the EU have continued their misguided actions. First, they decided that the war would finally see their long-standing dream, the destruction of Russia, fulfilled. Thus, they prohibited those in charge in Kiev to engage in peace negotiations. Then they decided that sanctions against nuclear programs would succeed where Ukrainians' weapons did not, to remove Putin from power. They still seem to believe this nonsense. They are preparing the 20th sanctions package. These people are acting like someone who has hit their head against a wall 19 times and never broken through, but refuses to give up the ludicrous plan and tries a 20th time. In the meantime, they instill fear in European citizens with ravings about Russian drones launching attacks all over Europe. Back in the day, seeing flying saucers was fashionable. I guess seeing drones everywhere is fashionable now. And the most tragic part is that ordinary Ukrainians pay the price of EU leaders' anti-Russian sentiments. The EU's leaders, the leaders of the US and Russia are trying to put an end to the war, but the EU's leaders are doing everything they can to perpetuate it. The leaders of the EU keep assuring Kiev that even if the US scaled down their assistance, Europe would send more money and more weapons. But these are empty promises because the EU doesn't have the money or the weapons. Instead of lying to the Ukrainian people, EU leaders should tell the truth. The truth is that gunfire will only stop when Ukraine becomes a neutral country instead of an anti-Russian puppet on Brussels strings. Thank you.
A teraz by som poprosil pani kolegyňu Kalniete.
And now I'd like to ask Mrs. Kalniete.
Can follow the rules of procedure. Now I'd like to give the floor to Madame Kalniete. Please let the speaker speak. Please let the speaker speak. I will have to sadly notify the Secretariat. Please go to your place. Please. Can I ask you to take your seat? Please, can I ask you to take your seat? I will have to refer you to the services. Take your seat, please. Madam Kalniete, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Colleagues, while so many are enjoying the Olympics on their TV screens, the terrorist state Russia is committing genocide against the Ukrainian nation. Drones and missiles systematically destroy the Ukrainian cogeneration and heating stations. They target the electricity transmission lines and their civil infrastructure. Millions of Ukrainians at -20 freezing conditions are left without heating, water and lighting. And in this barbaric fight for survival, the Ukrainian nation does not surrender. We have to help Ukraine by maximizing the humanitarian and energetic assistance, by strengthening its defense capabilities. We have to provide arms to Ukraine to enable it to destroy military targets in Russia. We have to urgently embrace Ukraine in the European Union by granting it the member state status and deepening it after each negotiation chapter concluded. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And just a reminder, blue card has been opened, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Jamal.
De l'eau dans une tasse sur un.
I fill 2 bottles of water. One bottle is by my feet and one by my hand, next to my hands, so I don't freeze. And everything I have, I take with me when I sleep. Svetlana uttered these words, and we hear this from thousands of people. 2025 was one of the most lethal for Ukrainian civilians. Russia is destroying the Ukrainian energy grid in the coldest winter ever. I'm saying this very clearly. These are grave crimes, and those responsible will have to be held accountable. Madam Commissioner, I'm very pleased that the European Civil Protection Mechanism is delivering generators, but we have to go further. We have to produce and deliver as many generators as possible and the necessary military means to intercept missiles. And of course, we will need budgetary support for Ukraine. Tomorrow, we will have to take a historic decision financed by EU funding without the support of these assets, 90 billion euro to support Ukraine. Interruption by the President. We will have to assume our responsibility tomorrow.
teraz poprosím kolegu Demetera. Nech sa páči.
Yes, thank you. Now I'd like to hand the floor to Demeter.
elleni támadások csak még több szenvedést okoznak.
Thank you. The attacks on Ukraine infrastructure have been going on for nearly 4 years and are creating far more suffering during the war. And we have this debate here in the European Union. We are trying to help those who are in need. 45% of energy import come from Hungary, and the same last year when it comes to electricity and gas. And 5,000 tons of these fuels are delivered to Ukraine from Hungary. We don't get any thanks for this, just far more threats. And given the destruction of the land and deaths of thousands of people is another reason we want peace in the country. But we can hear that the majority of people here are saying, supporting not necessarily peace negotiations, but more money to support the war. I would respectfully like to suggest that when it comes to electricity and attacks on this kind of infrastructure, that we show the same kind of respect when it comes to contributions made by others. The Dusha pipeline has been attacked, the one that flows through Hungary. Nothing has been said about that. The North Sea pipeline was attacked by Ukrainians, and there are those who hope that the pipeline that provides oil through Hungary and Slovakia also be attacked, which is not useful. So when you're talking about attacks on energy infrastructure, don't forget those that happen in member states. Thank you.
Will you accept the blue card from Mr. Banstetter? Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Demeter. I just have a question. Is it right that Mr. Orban said Ukraine is our enemy? And is it right that you're buying a lot from Russia, so you know you're financing also all these war crimes of Russia?
Az energiaellátásunkkal kapcsolatban kérdez.
Yes, thank you. When it comes to our energy supply, this is a debate that has been going on for quite some time. If you take a look at our energy situation, we inherited this, so to speak. We are landlocked, we have no sea. The energy infrastructure, or infrastructure in general, is one that we inherited. We have been trying to reduce dependency and have interconnectors, but obviously you can't do this overnight. If you say we have to buy energy from elsewhere, then you have to pay a price for this, and it's the Hungarian companies and families that are paying the price.
Sorry, are you asking for a follow-up question? Yes, then we need to press the mic.
Did Mr. Orban say Ukraine is our enemy, and why did he say it?
Mint önök számára is ismert, a magyar kormánynak, illetve az ukrán kormánynak sok vitája van.
Yes, thank you. As you well know, there are very many discussions between the Ukraine leadership and Hungarian leadership. There are a number of reasons for this. We do not want to support the war, and this means, of course, that we're holding lots of talks with the Ukrainian government. And Ukrainian politicians have often threatened Hungarian politicians, so there's two different measures.
Colleagues,
Since October 2025, Russia has destroyed 8.5 gigawatts of Ukrainian electric power generating capacity. Hundreds of thousands of people are currently surviving in minus 20 degrees without electricity, water and heating. After just one attack, 6,000 residential buildings in Kiev were left without heating. Europe is built on the principle of civilization. Wars are to take place between armies and not against children's hospitals and energy infrastructure. What Russia is doing in Ukraine means coming back to the methods of barbarism. Europe's response up to now has been power generators. Yes, they are necessary, but no generator can stop a missile and protect a power plant. Air defense starts where the threat has been eliminated. In January this year, the Patriot systems in Ukraine were often left empty. The systems were in place, but there were no air defense missiles. Ukraine has to be able to destroy launching places, warehouses and military bases where these attacks originate from. Long-range capacities are actually the capacities of defense. They protect hospitals, energy sector and civilians before the missiles even get launched. If we want to put an end to this crisis, Ukraine has to be able to stop missiles at the point of their origin, namely the Russian military bases, and we have to create this opportunity.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Strack-Zimmerman. President, Commissioner. Since Donald Trump has become president of the US, it's not that Russians have made progress on the ground, but the air attacks on civilians have increased dramatically. Since autumn of last year, Ukraine's energy, electricity, water infrastructure, heating infrastructure is being destroyed. And the idea is to sap the morale of the civilian population, and 31% more civilian deaths. Obviously, Trump and the US, they don't have to pay the price for this. He just gets the red carpet rolled out in Alaska, and that photo is hanging in the White House. This is contempt. This just shows contempt, and it prolongs the war. And this is hard to say this, but this is historical betrayal of our values, and it's all about personal enrichment and corruption. Commissioner, we need to supply equipment to support the people, but in particular we need to provide air defence, air defence, air defence. And Mr. Metz, please finally give the green light to supply Taurus missiles to destroy the Russian missiles which are causing so much suffering. Yes, thank you. And now the next speaker, Søvndal.
There's a small family alone in Kiev. They have no electricity, no heating in the cold winter. That is the brutal reality for Ukrainians day after day, night after night. And it's not that far away. It's a reality that is now true in this continent. The war has been going on for 4 years, and this war tyrant seems impossible to stop. More Ukrainians, more Russians will die because of his imperialistic dreams of creating great Russia. So, dear colleagues, there's no time to wait. With this international order, we need Europe to take on more of a role for our security and the Ukrainian security, because that is also our security. So let us increase our speed. Let us give them the weapons they need. Let us have this co-production that has been started in some areas. Let us show the Ukrainian government and people that reforms is the way into the EU, and you're welcome here.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Chair, blackouts are a part of the everyday life of Ukrainians. In Kiev, thousands of homes are without heating or water, while temperatures outside are even minus 20 degrees. This is a result of Putin's relentless, systematic and targeted attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, with the explicit purpose of freezing the Ukrainians into submission, break their resistance and forcing them to accept concessions in negotiations. And for those on the extreme right that were talking about diplomacy, this shows that diplomacy never takes place in isolation. Putin is attacking harder than ever to get a deal that is favourable to him, with the help of his ideological ally, Donald Trump. And this is why we must put more pressure on Russia sanctions on the shadow fleet, support for energy infrastructure, financial and military support, because only when Putin feels pressure will he ever have a real reason to negotiate. And that is why our support for Ukraine is so needed right now.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím kolegu Geisela.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Geisel. President, dear colleagues, at the moment what we are experiencing is a dramatic humanitarian crisis in Ukraine. But we should not forget that this humanitarian crisis has been going on for nearly 4 years. The destruction of the country is marching on daily. People are dying on the battlefields in Ukraine, and nearly every day we see civilians dying. And what is Europe doing? At the peace negotiations in Abu Dhabi, the European Union doesn't even have a seat at the side table. While the Americans and Russians are working on a draft of a peace agreement, the European heads of government are travelling to Washington to beg Mr. Trump to continue the war. And now the Union has also gone into €90 billion of debt so that Ukraine can buy more weapons, in particular from the US. This war could have been ended a lot sooner and in far more favourable conditions for Ukraine. Europe bears a considerable share of responsibility for having missed this opportunity. But it is never too late for peace. Europe has to finally make sure that this pointless and endless war and the humanitarian disaster are ended immediately.
A teraz poprosím kolegyňu Wiesler Lima.
And thank you. Now I'd like to give the floor to Mrs. Wiesler Lima.
Pouvons-nous imaginer ce que signifie? Can't we imagine what it means to be 0 degrees or -10 or -20 without heating, without electricity, without water, not just for a few hours, but day after day? The Russian army cannot really make headway on the ground, so they attack civilians. These tactics are a modern version of a siege. They're destroying infrastructure that serve the basic needs of the population, and I think that is very cowardly. Kiev inhabitant, after days without electricity, said words that really touched me. To see a bit of light in the city helps, even if we're in the dark. He was happy to see how others had some electricity restored. We have to maintain and increase our support to Ukraine. 4 years of them burying their fighters. They have shown resilience, incredible resilience, and the least that we can do is to stand by their side as long as it takes. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím pani.
Yes, thank you very much. And now Mrs. Fritzon.
Tack, herr talman.
Thank you, President. Russia's war of attack on Ukraine will have been ongoing for nearly 1,500 days soon. 1,500 days of fear, darkness and death. These attacks on Ukraine's energy systems have become a weapon that people in their everyday lives. In Kiev, people are freezing in their homes. They are going through weeks of temperatures up to 20 degrees negative. There's no electricity, no heating. Old people are trying to survive with hot water bottles made of plastic bottles. Blankets are running out. Children and young people are immediately affected. No schools, teaching being cancelled, health care being put under undue pressure. Society as a whole pressured. Ukraine's ability to resist is our shared responsibility, and that is why European countries need to stop buying Russian gas and feeding Putin's war coffers. We have to see that in Ukraine, children and the elderly are freezing. I'm freezing in my heart. Slava Ukraina.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Veriga, nech sa páči.
Mr. Veriga, please.
Kolegos, nesibaigiančios Rusijos atakos prieš Ukrainos civilinę infrastruktūrą, paliekant šimtus tūkstančių taikių civilių gyventojų, vaikų ir senolių be šilumos ir vandens, yra eilinė iliustracija, kad Rusija.
Thank you very much, President. Well, the Russians are destroying Ukrainian infrastructure and millions of people are without electricity and energy. Now, these are brutal attacks and they're aiming to break Ukrainian society, stop them resisting. There's only one way to go. We need to ensure that the European Union acts with everything it has available, military, humanitarian, political measures, etc. All of this needs to be done to support the Ukrainian leadership and people. This would be a clear sign. Also, looking to the future, we need to ensure that the security of our own countries, we need to improve the security of our own country as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, dear Commissioner, dear colleagues. It was a very impressive but also sad experience to go to the Holodomor Museum in Kiev. Holodomor, that was Stalin's genocide through famine. And now we have Putin's genocide through cold. So he's Stalin the second. He's a copy of Stalin. He wants as many people as possible killed because he sees he cannot win the war how he had planned it. So he wants to destroy the spirit of the Ukrainians. He wants to kill as many people as possible. And so it's important that we help as far as we can, help for Ukraine. And then I hear these people from the right wing, they say, no, we don't want to help. So what does it mean? They want that people are dying, and we have to say that very clearly. There are people here in this European Parliament who say, no support for Ukraine. We don't mind if Europeans die out of cold because the dictator wants that. So thank you very much, Commissioner Marta Kroes. Europe stands with Ukraine. You said it, and I think we all, the majority in this House, we mean it. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Kunke, nech sa páči.
Thank you, Mrs. Kunke, now please.
4 år.
President, 4 years of war in Ukraine, 4 years of Putin's evil, 4 years of bloody war, oppression, drones, deaths, bombs, 4 years where people have been sent to the front. 4 years of corridors, 4 very long years. Putin's war machine really needs to be shut down, and we in Europe, the European Union, absolutely have to support Ukraine. And this is the right thing to do. We have to allow Ukraine to decide on its own future. Slava Ukraina.
Teraz poprosím kolegu Szczerbu.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Chiba, please.
Wysoka Izbo, Pani Komisarz, wszyscy przyzwoici ludzie nie mają wątpliwości, po której stronie stanąć. Dzisiaj stoimy przy Ukrainie.
President, we are seeing certain things going on, and anyone of good faith knows exactly what should be done. Ukraine has no hot water, heating, electricity. So what we should do is clear. The support that we've given to Ukraine so far is necessary, but I'd like to draw your attention to other initiatives that are taking place in member states. In Warsaw, for example, my government is giving strategic reserves to Ukraine. For example, heat generators. 10 million zloty have been donated to ensure that Ukrainians can continue to stay warm. Polish Catholic churches are helping as well. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, I just got back from Kiev myself. And to all those who still doubt Putin's intention, I can tell you his terror against the population is real. Unable to win the battle on the field, Putin targets the civilian population, women, children, elderly. At minus 27 degrees, Ukrainians are now without heating, without energy, without water. And yet, colleagues, I did not meet a single Ukrainian who was therefore ready to surrender. On the contrary, even as the Russian bombs and drones were raining on them, Ukrainians are standing tall, showing kindness to their neighbours, building invincibility centres, even improvising parties on frozen rivers, showing Putin what a defiant European people look like. They do so because they know that surrender and appeasement will only mean more bombs and more aggression, and that peace with Russia is only possible from a position of strength. So colleagues, this is the moment for Europe to show some strength ourselves. So let's approve the Ukrainian support loan. Let's pass the 20th sanction package and deliver the urgently needed air defense. This is the moment.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Karlsdorf. Nech sa páči.
Thank you, Mrs. Carl.
Colleagues, kommissionen, herr talman.
Colleagues, President, representative of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen. We have got Russian athletes competing in the Winter Olympic Games, and thus a part of their propaganda machine. So on the one hand, we are criticising Russia, and on the other hand, we're allowing them to build up an image which is positive, which counters the awful images of Ukrainian dead. The current system obviously isn't working. And let's be honest, in 2014 the world walked away when Putin attempted to annex Ukraine. To tell the truth, neutrality is not really a choice. Being neutral is a choice, and it's not the right one. Slava Ukraini.
Mr. Sinkevicius.
Russia is a terrorist state. It's deliberately bombing Ukrainian heating facilities, water cleaning facilities, leaving people without heating, without water, without availability to switch on the light, while outside there is minus 27 degrees. And it's all done deliberately, strategically. These strikes are strategic and are designed to freeze Ukrainian people into submission and to weaken European resolve. We as Europeans, I very much welcome that we are sending generators, humanitarian aid, but it's not enough. Humanitarian support alone won't stop terrorist attacks on Ukrainian people. Europe must go further. We need to accelerate robust air defense cooperation shield and shield Ukrainian people. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Maželisa, nech sa páči.
Dėkoju pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos. Kremlius siekia palaužti Ukrainos.
Thank you, colleagues. Well, there are efforts being made by Russia to break Ukraine, but Ukraine has been supporting Ukraine. We have supported them in financial terms, also provided generators, etc., etc. Millions have been spent. The European Bank for Development has spent 1.2 billion, has mobilized 1.2 billion euros for the Ukrainian energy systems. But these figures aren't actually that great, given the amount of destruction that Russia has caused. According to the World Bank, damages to Ukraine, energy infrastructure, and other infrastructure is far, far more expensive to repair. So we need to try and mobilize more resources. But if we do that, we're going to have to, if we don't do that, we're going to have to pay an extremely high price. Thank you.
Imagine spending winter at minus 20 degrees like Minos's family are, people suffering in darkness. This is Putin's fault. He's a monster. He's a war criminal. And we should be supporting Ukraine energetically. We should help Ukraine to ensure its energy infrastructure is rebuilt. That is as much a duty on us as providing them with military support. We have to cooperate with them. It is our duty, both in the interest of the most vulnerable in Ukraine, as well as in the interest of the European Union itself. And if you look at Russia and energy, we have to cooperate. We have to create an energy system for us based on our own renewable sources, which can't be manipulated from the outside world. But what's primarily urgent is to help Ukraine to get through this winter and to never have any what they call white deaths. No bombs, but people dying amongst the population all the same. Thank you.
Prosím, kolego Koboška.
Mr. Kobosko.
Thank you, Chair, Madam Commissioner, colleagues. The attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure reveal the true scale of brutality of Putin's aggression. Russian troops are no longer fighting Ukrainian soldiers. They are waging war against families, women, children and the elderly. They are targeting people who are being deprived of electricity, heating and water in the middle of winter. When the temperature inside an apartment is close to zero and outside it falls to -25, this is an extremely urgent matter, one that fully deserves urgent debate in this House. If Vladimir Putin seeks to break the morale of the Ukrainian people, then this House, and indeed the entire European continent, must demonstrate even greater empathy and solidarity. 4 years ago and today alike, the people of Poland have shown their solidarity, solidarność. Hundreds of power generators have been sent from Poland to Ukraine, provided both by the government and through civil society fundraising campaigns. We will stand by Ukraine until a just and lasting peace is achieved. Thank you.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím kolegu Bozelagera. Nech sa páči.
Mr. Bozelagera now, please.
Holodomor. Dear colleagues, have you ever heard this dark term before? Its literal translation is death by cold. It's a war crime you'd expect to read about in history books, not in Europe in 2026. But this is exactly the reality that Ukrainians are suffering right now as Putin's bombs leave millions to freeze in Arctic weather conditions. Colleagues, there's not a single power plant that has not been attacked by Russia. And the target here is clear. It's not the Ukrainian army, its tanks and its soldiers. It is the weak, the babies and children, the elderly and the sick. That, dear colleagues, is the true face of Putin right now. That is the face of the man that Orban and Trump want to shake hands with and that some here still want to make deals with. Colleagues, when people freeze to death in their houses, we have to do everything we can to support them against this mass murder. That means delivering all the short-term heating capacity that we can, to give Ukraine the power over the skies with real air defense and delivering Taurus rockets, and it is to heat the frozen assets, to melt them and use them for Ukraine's defense. Colleagues, let's stop Holodomor. Slava Ukraini.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Štýra. Nech sa páči.
Hvala. Mr. Štýra.
Thank you very much, Chair. Russia has never given up controlling the entire Ukraine. For them, Ukraine is part of the Russian world, and they don't want to give it up, irrespective of regime changes or ideologies. In the past, the justification was the socialist revolution, and now they're talking again about Moscow as the third Rome, the guardian of civilization, and then they have the right to rule the destiny of other peoples, especially Ukrainians. And then when Ukrainians stand up against the occupation, then Moscow decides to destroy them. Yesterday it was the Holodomor, and today it's attacks on energy infrastructure so that they freeze and die frozen. But Russia is also suffering losses, material and in people. Probably
and Russia already sees now that China is now drawing borders of Russia in a different manner. So now Russia needs to decide and needs to stop the attack.
Mrs. Blinkevičiūtė, please.
Ačiū pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos. Rusijos išpuoliai prieš Ukrainos energetikos sistemą nėra.
President, colleagues, Commissioner, well, the Russian attacks on the Ukrainian energy system are not incidental. It's a strategy to murder civilians and also to leave families without light, heat and hot water in the middle of winter. This is clearly a humanitarian crisis. The EU needs to act in a solidarity-based manner. We urgently need to support Ukrainian energy infrastructure in a greater manner. We need, over the long term, to rebuild it. As well as taking short-term measures, we also need to increase the pressure on Russia's defence sector using sanctions. I think it's clear that Europe cannot simply stand by and look on. Ukrainian energy security is European security as well. Ukraine needs to be supported for so long until it's too expensive for Russia to proceed. Thank you.
Talman, kommissionär, Putin använder...
President, Commission, Putin is using the cold in his war against Ukraine. There's systematic bombing of the infrastructure there, meaning that many Ukrainians are having to live without heat, without water. In the midst of extremely cold weather, we're talking about attacks against civil society here. Targeted attacks, a part of war, which completely runs counter to international law. What a shame. Shame on Putin. Shame for targeting civilians, young people, old people who have to live without any of civilization's necessities. We need to raise our voice, therefore. We need to stand with Ukraine. We need to provide more resources, more protection. We need to say, enough. Ukraine has to be able to resist all this.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, colleagues. Last weekend I was with a couple of colleagues in Kiev. One alarm after the other, siren went off. And bombarding was going on. Energy infrastructure has suffered heavy damage, and this at a time when it's very cold outside. 600,000 people have had to flee their homes. And Putin realizes that his strategy is to put pressure on the civilian population. How long can this last without us giving proper support? We need to support the Ukrainians so long as it takes until they can manage the situation themselves and defeat Putin. That's our duty, to support them, to stand by their sides, and it's in our own interest. Slava Ukraina.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Fries, nech sa páči.
Mrs. Fries, please.
Year after year, Putin continues his aggressive war. People are dying, but not only on the battlefield. People are dying. They are freezing from the cold. The systemic targeting of Ukraine's energy system is not only a military tactic, it's designed to break civilian resilience. Because when electricity is cut, when hospitals struggle to operate, when heating systems stop functioning, what's the result? Survival itself quickly becomes a real concern. And that's precisely why critical energy assets are now frontline targets in modern warfare. That's the reality the war in Ukraine has illustrated so painfully clear. This is a lesson that Europe must take seriously for Ukraine and for the rest of Europe's future. Decentralized green energy systems are inherently more resilient than the traditional centralized fossil fuel energy structure. Solar panels powering hospitals, battery system keeping water treatment plants running, local wind supplying towns, and microgrids allowing emergency services to operate even when national electricity grids are disrupted. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you. And just to inform you, I'm closing Catch the Eye, and I would like to give the floor to Madame Theodoros Kumave.
Tack talman. Om 2 veckor är det 4 år sedan Rysslands fullskala.
Thank you very much. In 2 weeks' time, it will be 4 years of war by Russia against Ukraine, of terror and bombings. And recently we've seen an escalation in the violence with bombs falling, fires, attacks on infrastructure. And Putin is using even the weather as a weapon. The result, we need to do more to protect Ukraine so that it can win this war. And we have to stop these blackouts in Ukraine. We have to ensure that their critical infrastructure works properly. We need to finance rebuilding their infrastructure through systems whereby we've also got satellite links. We can't do everything, but what we can do is protect. And the question isn't whether Ukraine can do things on its own. The question is, will Europe help? Thank you.
Sapachi.
Mr. Groothuis now, please.
The Commissioner, while everyone was busy with Venezuela and Greenland, Kiev has reached a tipping point. More than 500,000 people left the city and energy supplies are down in the midst of winter. So stop being complacent about what we already have achieved for Ukraine. The only thing that matters whether it's enough. We were also busy with NATO Secretary General Rutte, who said we need the US for our defenses. Fine to debate it, but the best way to prevent that from happening in the first place is, of course, to prevent Russia from winning in Ukraine. Maybe it's time to be very busy ourselves to do what is necessary. And we are, because tomorrow we vote to support Ukraine with over 90 billion. Brilliant. But why is France busy blocking Ukraine to buy long-range Storm Shadow missiles from the UK? Petty politics. Why is Germany busy blocking the long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine? And why couldn't Spain, Italy and other southern European nations finally step up? So 90 billion tomorrow, brilliant, but we have busy times ahead. Thanks.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu. Sorry, I forgot. Bart? Blue card. From Mr. Van Lanschot. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Groothuis, I know you as a strong supporter for Ukraine, and your call for stop with being complacent and us needing to be more busy with ourselves, it appeals to me. I also share your frustration towards some of the countries who put petty politics before support for Ukraine. But my question to you is, if we look at ourselves and we want to be busy with ourselves, what other steps can we take to make sure that Ukraine wins?
There's only one answer, Mr. Van Lanschot. That's how we won against the communists in the 90s, is that they feel they can't win in the long term. We have to put forward long-term investments to support Ukraine that Putin realizes he can never win. It's the only way to help them. Better, like your colleague Sinkevicius rightfully said, putting forward humanitarian aid is fine, it's good, and we needed to do it. And I very much applaud the Commission and what it's doing to put forward power generators. But the real way to help Ukraine is to put forward long-range striking missiles.
Follow-up question, okay.
Yes, thank you. I agree, but another way to help them could be to, for example, protect Western Ukrainian skies with European air forces so that Ukraine has more protection and more capacity to focus on the front line and for fighting off the Russians. What do you think about that idea?
Let's be very short. It should have happened a long time ago. Thank you very much. I agree.
Short answers. Panna Wiesner.
A few days ago, the Olympic fire was lit in Milan. The same night, Russia fired 447 missiles and drones towards energy facilities in Ukraine. The halls in Italy with curling, hockey and figure skating will take place is about -1 to -5 degrees. The temperature in Ukraine has dropped to under -21 in the past days. When you are watching the Olympic Games in your nice, warm living room, 1,400 apartments in Kiev are still without heating. When the opening ceremony of the Olympic echoes messages about peace, it is evident that Vladimir Putin is not listening. Energy can be weaponized. Energy is being weaponized. My message is, don't let Putin use energy as a weapon in this war against Ukraine. To all of the EU members, make the Ukraine Energy Support Fund work. Contribute now to help Ukraine. And to all of the power plant workers across Ukraine, you are two heroes. You are all heroes in this war. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Žalimasa, nech sa páči.
Mr. Zalimas, please.
Commissioner, dear colleagues, under international humanitarian law, attacks against civilian objects and infrastructure indispensable to the survival of civilian population are strictly prohibited. The deliberate destruction of Ukraine's energy system in winter imposes conditions of life that may even fall within the definition set out in the Genocide Convention as an act calculated to bring about the destruction of a national group. These attacks are enabled by the ultranationalist imperialist ideology of the so-called Russism, which rejects international law, sovereignty of its neighbors, and the very existence of Ukrainians as a nation. Accountability, therefore, must become unavoidable. We must support the establishment of a special tribunal for the crime of aggression against Ukraine. We must also reiterate our full support for the ongoing investigation by the International Criminal Court, which has the jurisdiction over these horrific attacks. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we come to Catch the Eye. I have two requests, so both will be granted. And as the first one, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Tinkinen.
Thank you, Mr. President. The word Russia is worth less than the toilet paper we wipe ourselves with. So when Russia promised to enter into so-called energy ceasefire with Ukraine at the end of January, only a stupid person couldn't have guessed what would happen next. 4 days later, the Russian war machine struck again. Make no mistake, the brave Ukrainians had no misgivings about the sincerity of Russia's commitment to this ceasefire. You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth. You must fight and hit back. And that is why it is so painful to see some of you in this chamber still waffling on what to do about Putin's rampage. History will judge you if you choose to let the tiger continue its spree of terror. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Van Laschota. Nech sa páči.
Thank you, Chair. Apparently, some European leaders were offended by Zelensky's comments in Davos. Seriously? What about the following is untrue? In Europe, there are endless internal arguments and things left unsaid that stop Europe from uniting and speaking honestly, enough to find real solutions. Instead of taking the lead in defending freedom worldwide, especially when America's focus shifts elsewhere, Europe looks lost. Europe's problem is its institutions. The current way, Europe will remain a divided collection of small and medium-sized powers. When we are united, we are truly invincible, a global force, not one that reacts late, but one that defines the future. This is an accurate description of the current reality. So to these European leaders that felt uncomfortable, I say, if the truth makes you feel uncomfortable, please get more uncomfortable. You will never be as uncomfortable as the Ukrainian mom in Kiev trying to keep her baby warm in the freezing cold. So face the truth and act. Set up a no-fly zone, give the towers rockets, give all emergency heating and accelerate EU accession. Thank you.
Thank you. And now to conclude the debate, I would like to give the floor to Madam Commissioner Koss.
Mr. Chair, dear honourable members, I have listened carefully, and one message is clear: Ukraine must not face this winter alone. Let us be honest about what we are dealing with. Russia is not merely attacking infrastructure, it is deliberately targeting civilians, trying to freeze families into submission, to turn cold and darkness into weapons of war. This is brutality, plain and simple, and it demands a European response that is both firm and united. This is what we are delivering. To those asking for better protection of Ukrainian skies, yes, you are right, defence matters. To those asking for speed, you are right, time matters. To those asking for reforms and safeguards, you are right, every euro must strengthen resilience and good governance. Our approach does both. So the choice before us is very straightforward. Either we act decisively now, or we risk higher economic, humanitarian and strategic costs later. Europe has never hesitated when our security and our values are at stake, and we should not hesitate now. So let us stay united, let's move quickly, and let us send a clear message to Ukraine and to Russia. Europe stands firm with Ukraine, and Europe delivers. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne, pani komisárka, a je dôležité v tých ťažkých momentoch stáť pri ľuďoch v Ukrajine, ktorí čelia naozaj hroznému hladomoru.
It's important in difficult times to stand by Ukraine's side. A further point on the agenda, the statement of the Commission, violence against civilians in Syria, ceasefire. Mrs. Switzer will now speak in the name of the Commission. She's coming in a couple of minutes.
No stress. Thank you, Madam Commissioner. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, dear Chair, honourable members. The recent developments in Syria reflect the challenges that the country is still facing, 1 year after the fall of Assad's regime. The fighting between the Syrian transitional government and the Syrian democratic forces led to changed geopolitical landscape in Aleppo and northeast Syria, with major gains for Damascus. The handling of the situation in the northeast will be a decisive and indicative test for the Syrian transitional government. There is now a window of opportunity for Syria to show that it can move forwards and towards a truly inclusive transition. The Syrian transitional government and the Syrian democratic forces are currently implementing the 30th January agreement, which includes, first, integration in the mainstream administrative and security forces, second, political participation of Kurds in local and central governance, third, education recognition, and fourth, governmental control over key oil fields, airport and border crossings. It is important that the presidential decree of the 16th January, granting a broad spectrum of rights to the Kurdish people, is fully implemented. The recent developments also highlight the ongoing security risks, especially the potential resurgence of Daesh. We remain concerned about the escape of an unknown number of detainees. While transferring detainees to Iraq will alleviate pressure on Syria, the burden remains significant. Damascus is now the main interlocutor for countering terrorism. Nonetheless, the Kurds have been a steadfast ally against terrorism, and we hope that they will remain engaged while integrated in the mainstream Syrian institutions. The EU and Member States are the main donors for Syria, including regarding the camps and northeast Syria. We will continue supporting Syria through bilateral assistance and within the framework of the global coalition. As the largest humanitarian donor, the European Union remains also committed to providing humanitarian aid to Syrians as long as needed. However, humanitarian assistance alone cannot meet all the needs in Syria and must be complemented with increased development and recovery funding. Since the fall of Assad, the European Union has adapted its relationship with Syria to support an inclusive political transition that means the aspiration of all Syrians by leveraging political dialogue, sanctions and assistance. In 2025, we hosted the 9th Brussels conference. We also launched the Syria Partnership Coordination Forum and co-organized the Day of Dialogue focused on civil society. We also mobilized then €424 million in European Union support for Syria, including €175 million for social economic recovery, which we must drive forward even more vigorously. The visit of Presidents both von der Leyen and Costa on the 9th of January was a clear signal of our willingness to engage with Damascus. It has highlighted a new political partnership, reinforcing economic cooperation and offering a new substantial financial package of €620 million for 2026 and 2027. There is clearly a mutual interest for us and the Syrians to work together on institution and capacity building. Through this, the European Union can anchor the transition in key principles of sustainable governance, accountability and justice, and contribute to rebuilding trust between the state and society. The European Union remains committed to engaging with Syria and regional partners in view of ensuring both an inclusive transition and stability and security. Thank you so much.
Teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Terlák.
And now, Ms. Terlák for the EPP.
That you don't fall down on the stairs, it can be dangerous. Happens to best of us. No problem.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, northeast Syria is once again descending in violence and civilians are paying the price. Since early January, clashes between government forces and the Syrian Democratic Forces have spread from Aleppo towards Raqqa, al-Sahaka and Deir ez-Zor. The consequences are devastating. Hundreds of thousands without electricity, water or food. Over 170,000 people displaced, and children are dying from cold, hunger and lack of basic medical care. At the same time, the fragile security architecture that kept Daesh contained is unraveling. Turmoil around detention centers such as El Hol and Roy has already led to the escape of ISIL fighters. Let us be clear. What happens in these camps will not stay in Syria. It directly affects Europe. We take note of the ceasefire and integration agreement of 30th January. Accession of hostilities is essential. But stability cannot come at the expense of rights, representation and local governments. The Kurdish population, which paid a heavy price in the fight against Daesh, especially the ladies, must be meaningfully included in Syria's political future. We condemn the serious human rights violations reported in recent weeks and call for independent investigations and full UN access. This Parliament must act by increasing humanitarian aid, supporting counter-terrorism efforts, protecting minorities and advancing an inclusive Syrian-led political transition. Europe must not look away. Thank you so much.
Ďakujem pekne. A teraz poprosím kolegu Maniatisa za skupinu.
Thank you, Mr. Maniatis, for the Socialists.
Speaker, President, the situation in northeastern Syria is extremely fragile and very, very concerning. From the beginning of January, we have military conflicts. The attack of the forces of the temporary government, transitional government against the Kurds and the Syrian democratic forces, and the repeated violations of the ceasefire have led to displacements, massive displacements, lack of basic services, and increasing danger for the civilians, and especially for women and children. The agreement of the 30th of January is an important step towards stabilization. However, it should be implemented and should lead to a real inclusive transition which will respect the self-government regime of northeastern Syria. The transitional government has to prove that it means what it says. Words are not enough anymore. We need specific actions that will assure the political and cultural rights of all the religious and ethnic minorities in Syria. The European Union has responsibility to support actively this procedure. We should support the new Syrian government. However, any financing should be accompanied by very serious points concerning the protection of fundamental rights of all citizens, irrespective of their religion and nationality and ethnicity. We should condemn the destabilizing role played by third countries, such as Turkey. Turkey is creating the tension in northeastern Syria and attacks in Kobani the Kurds, where the humanitarian situation is extremely critical. Finally, we shouldn't forget that thousands of ex-fighters of Daesh remain in the region. The danger of them being set free and to have terrorism reborn in the area is something more than tangible. Today, our message should be clear. Ceasefire, protection of the civilians, respect of rights, and a real inclusive political transition protecting the rights of all citizens. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Tarča za skupinu Patrioti pre Európu. Nech sa páči.
Thank you.
Mr. Church.
A year ago in Moscow, Assad, the last dictator, went over to Moscow and was replaced by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham leader, Ahmad al-Shara, propped up by Western leaders. And we deal with them as though they were democratic leaders for the future in Syria. We warned about the danger of this unconditional support of these Islamists against vulnerable groups. Whilst this parliament legitimised Ahmad al-Shara as a leader, it acted very naively when he said that he was going to have an inclusive transition. And yet what we saw was death. And the same went for the Druses in the south of the country, although Israel got involved to protect them. Now it's up to the Kurds in the northeast of Syria. It's their turn with ethnic cleansing and religious cleansing also subsidised by Turkey. Well, Islamist inclusive transition, that doesn't mean anything. There's the threats of reprisals and jihadist terrorism. What we are not seeing is respect for the life of non-Muslim minorities. Thank you.
A teraz poprosím kolegu Bielana za Európskych konzervatívcov a reformistov. Nech sa páči.
Mr. Bielan.
Regime in December 2024 ended 5 decades of Ba'athist authoritarianism, long sustained by Russian military, financial and political support. Moscow's intervention prolonged the war, enabled mass atrocities and destabilized the region far beyond Syria's border. Yet Assad's collapse has not brought stability. Power vacuums are being filled by fragmented armed groups, and the transitional government's leader, Ahmed al-Sharia, emerging from a Sunni Islamist militant background, shows no remorse for past ties to al-Qaeda. How can Syria move toward peace when the remnants of jihadist networks risk replacing one form of authoritarian rule with another? Not to mention ISIS and the threat of its resurgence as jihadist fighters have escaped from prisons, including some holding EU citizenship. This creates a direct threat to the European security. The EU's position must be clear. Syria cannot move from dictatorship into jihadist instability.
Ďakujem. A teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Loaz za skupinu Renew Europe. Nech sa páči.
Chers collègues, vous m'avez
Be your rapporteur on Syria, and it's an honour. And I want to talk to you about honour. I would like Europe to honour its debt, that which it has with the Kurdish people who fought with us against Daesh for more than 10 years. The Kurds are brothers in arms, and knowing that they depend on humanitarian convoys and that they're encircled is not acceptable. We need to help them against Turkey and other people who are working against them. The terms of the 29th of January needs to be respected. This agreement would not have happened without the involvement of France, and France has the honour to have contributed to a ceasefire and Kurdish specificity. And the rise of Damas wouldn't have been possible without the support of Turkey and the laissez-faire, hands-off approach of the US. Washington and Ankara took the risk through their indifference in having a situation where jihadi prisoners could escape. There is nothing honourable about the choices they've made. But let's come back to Europe. We need to make our support to Syria conditional upon the respect of all of Syria's peoples. It's up to us to face the situation of the jihadi prisoners whose fate is as important to us as it is to Syria and Iraq. They are for us a security risk that we've had for years subcontracted out to the Kurds in Syria. We can no longer look the other way. It's about our own security and also about our honour.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegyňu Neumann za skupinu Zelených, Európska slobodná aliancia.
Dear colleagues, the brutal attacks on the northeast are a painful reminder of Syria's darkest chapters. An entire generation in Syria has grown up under Assad's cruel dictatorship and civil war. Every new escalation opens wounds that never had the time to heal. The violence must end once and for all, and this is the responsibility of all sides. And it is al-Shara's responsibility, if he wants to be the president of Syria, to be a president for all Syrians and to ensure that Syria is safe for everyone. For decades, majority Kurdish areas have been the most democratic and inclusive parts of Syria. They are a blueprint for the future many Syrians hope for. Kurdish rights are now written into a decree. But real guarantees must be enshrined into the constitution, and Kurdish representatives need to have a seat at the table in Damascus. And we also have a homework of our own, dear colleagues. For years, I have called on our governments to repatriate Daesh fighters and families to bring them to justice in Europe. Now the risk of Daesh regrouping is higher than ever. I would rather see these fighters in European prisons than back on the battlefields. And all of this clearly shows Syria is not safe for forced returns. Instead of scaring Syrians in Europe and fueling toxic migration debates, let's all focus on helping rebuild a country that finally has a chance to heal its wounds and becomes free for everyone.
Ďakujem. Prosím kolegu Schindervana za skupinu Lavice v Európskom parlamente. Nech sa páči.
Herr Präsident.
President Kobane is under siege, and they're surrounded by the troops of the Syrian troops. Their lack of food, medicine, water is short, and we have. How can we have the jihadist al-Shura having become the best friend of the Europeans? Mrs. von der Leyen gave Syria large sum of money on the very day when the al-Shura started his war against the Kurds. That wasn't bad timing. That's the outcome of a cynical political approach, the only goal of which is to get the Syrian refugees out of Europe, away from Europe, as far as possible, and turn them back to Syria. I spoke with Mr. Kobani, and people who, regardless of their religion and ethnic belonging, just want a fair society in Syria. These people need international support, and instead of that, we have France and Germany turning their back on our allies there. And we have a murderous ideology wearing a tailor-made suit, but it still remains murderous ideologies. We mustn't roll out the red carpet for al-Shura. We need the Kurds to win the day in order to ensure a democratic and fair Syria. It was a tower of hope in the Middle East. But now all of this is under attack by the government in Syria, and we mustn't give al-Shura any money. We need an end to the fighting. We need to recognize self-government, and we need to stand up for the rights of the Kurds. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Sala za skupinu Európa suverénnych národov.
And now, Mr. Herschel.
Well, the new president of Syria comes from an offshoot group from Al-Qaeda, and the European Commission is supporting this regime with money. 600 million, I think, was handed over when the president of the Commission went to Syria. So that's something we need to talk about. Now, the latest victims of your values are the Kurds. There are terrorists attacking them, and also terrorists are escaping from the prisons that the Kurds were watching. Now, we are funding these Syrian Islamists, and that is a problem. Now, 1 million Syrians live in Germany. Only a third of them are working, but they're overrepresented when it comes to rapes, murders, etc. Many German women have been raped by foreigners. And those are the values, I would say, that you stand for. The war finished over a year ago now. Friedrich Merz has announced that he's going to be deporting lots of people. But do you know how many Syrians have been deported since he said that? Just one single one. But we've had 50,000 new migrants during that time. In Berlin, Syrians celebrated the fall of Assad. But we need to ensure that they can live their dreams in Syria rather than in Europe. So our priorities are clear. Let's send Syrian refugees back. We need also to send Ursula von der Leyen to the moon, I would say.
Prosím kolegu Sancheza Amora, nech sa páči.
Thank you. Mr. Sanchez Amor.
Thank you, President. I'll be speaking in Spanish. Dear Commissioner, some friendly advice for institutions of the EU. We shouldn't interfere in the institutional design of the country. If all minorities are included, the war has changed reality on the ground. That now needs to be changed into a constitution and a legal system. And the country has to decide how its new constitution reflects the new reality on the ground. We shouldn't carry on giving a blank cheque to the government to keep playing this double game of uncontrolled militias and a national army. When something goes banned, they send in the militias, it's the Alawites, and if not, then it's the national army. This has to be part of the conditions we set. The government has to stop using or saying that it doesn't control the militias when things go well, and when things do go well, it just uses the army. So we actually have to tackle this issue of the dual face of power in the country. And as we've heard, we have to support the minorities who have values closest to those of us in Europe. Thank you.
Teraz poprosím kolegu Garo, nech sa páči.
La Syrie est engagée dans un affrontement armé contre les forces.
Syria is in armed conflict with the Kurds who were on the front line against the jihadi groups. So this is the context, and hundreds of jihadi fighters have now escaped from prisons that are no longer controlled by the Kurds. Now this is a time bomb. This area is at the doors of Europe. For years we have been criticising the failures of European democracies, particularly France, and they have compromised themselves now. Macron was the first to receive the Syrian president with all honours, and the president's links to Al-Qaeda are well known. Islamist armed groups have plunged Syria into terrorism and violence. Now, the European executive and the French government have refused to look reality in the face, and now they're sitting on a veritable powder keg. These terrorists are now escaping prisons, as I say, and no one knows where they are. But I think the answer is clear. What they're going to try and do is get to Europe by any means possible, taking advantage of the mass immigration that's being allowed to take place. And every jihadi is now a direct threat to European citizens. We can't have our countries exposed to this kind of danger just for ideological reasons. We need to boost checks at the borders and stop these migration flows. The security of our citizens cannot be negotiated away. We can't have Syrian chaos in our streets. Thank you.
Teraz poprosím kolegu Gambina, nech sa páči.
Colleagues, the situation in northeastern Syria is extremely delicate. Violence against civilians continues, particularly against Christians and other minorities. The conflict has been going on for many years. The agreement between Damascus and the Syrian Kurds it gives us some hope, but its situation is still very uncertain. Guarantees of security, monitoring mechanisms, and the risks of not being able to have a ceasefire, all of these things continue. We need to react with practicality and responsibility. We need to support a sustainable ceasefire, a protection of minorities, ensuring security in northeastern Syria. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím pani kolegyňu Al-Sahlani. Nech sa páči.
Mrs. Al-Salani, please.
Somehow a debate about the dire situation in Syria turned into a migration debate by the far right. That's amazing. But President, dear colleagues, when al-Shara took to power, we all accepted him with a very bitter taste. So today I'm standing here in a Kurdish traditional dress to honor the Kurdish women and the people who have paid a very high price for their freedom. When they answered our call for help, were we trying to face Daesh, ISIS, the most horrible terror organization, they were not only defending their homes, but they were also defending our freedom. Kurds are asking for our help now. The roles are reversed. Protection that is denied is injustice. An injustice that is postponed is a justice that is denied. Kurdish women are not left alone even when dead, because when they die, the terrorists cut off their braids. The attacks on the Kurdish areas has to stop now. A ceasefire has to come now. And taking away, lifting the de facto siege on Kobani has to lift now. Kurds, we see you, we hear you. You have more friends than the mountains in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Ďakujem a teraz poprosím kolegu Satoriho.
Thank you. Mr. Satori.
Je vais vous raconter une histoire.
Let me tell you a story. A French story. The story of Europe giving up on its principles. Hamza is the person I'm going to talk about. He's French. When he was 12, he was taken to Syria by his mother. He was exposed to war, death, the camps in northeast Syria, and he never chose that. His childhood was stolen from him. He's 22 years old. He's not guilty of anything. But while I speak, he is in an Iraqi prison. He's being interrogated and beaten up. Now, why is he in Iraq? Because France let it happen. He's not guilty of anything, but France is guilty. France is guilty of refusing to repatriate its citizens, particularly those children who were forced to Syria. There are dozens of people like Hamza. I've met some of them, and they're waiting to be repatriated. Their parents are waiting to go to court and face justice, and victims' associations want to see them in court. So let's act in line with our principles. Let's repatriate these children because they're innocent, and let's bring these adults back to trial. Thank you.
Ilaria Salis.
Thank you. In recent days, we lived with deep, dark concern for the fate of the autonomous administration of northeast Syria, for the present and the future of the democratic confederalist revolution. We fear the worst, but as our comrades on the ground taught us, we never abandon resistance. We never lost hope. Now, an agreement with the transitional government of Syria has been signed. If this was possible, it is thanks to the massive, powerful mobilization of the peoples of northeast Syria. It is thanks to the rise of the Kurdish people across Turkey, Iraq and Iran. And it is also thanks to the international solidarity. Now, we must stay vigilant. We must ensure that every single term of that agreement is respected. We are not naive. We know that agreements are often disrespected and always reflect relations of power. This is why it's up to us to do everything we can to strengthen the honest. Democratic confederalism is not just a regional project. It is a concrete alternative of peace and justice in the world dominated by nationalism, suprematism and violence. It is for the Kurds, but not only for the Kurds. It is for Arabs, Assyrians, Armenians, Yazidis and Turkmen. It is for women. It is for everyone who wishes to live free. This struggle concerns us all. And the illegal siege of Kobane, humanitarian access now. Biji biji rojava.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fröhlich.
Herr Präsident, Sie bejubelten Assad.
You were happy when al-Jilani came to power. He's a former al-Qaeda terrorist. He's now walking on the red carpet, meeting the great and the good from Europe, and you wonder about the end of Kurdish autonomy in the north. You're naive. You want to stabilize Syria. You need to speak with the players in the area, with Erdogan, with others. We have taken many Syrians. Turkey has taken many Syrians. Assad is gone, and now they need to go back to Syria so that we can get stability in Syria, and we need to avoid chaos and mass migration. We need diplomacy. The ceasefire is good, but it's a brittle ceasefire. If the people flee their country once again, we're going to have Syrian problems in Europe once again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Geisel.
Herr Präsident, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen.
President, colleagues, in Syria, we're seeing a moral and security policy-based admission of failure. For a decade, we celebrated the Kurds as heroes. Over 11,000 Kurdish fighters lost their lives in order to defeat IS. Also for our security here in Europe. And how do we thank them? Well, we just look on while they're being attacked on all sides. The UN has reported that 170,000 people have been expelled from their homes, over 90% of them women and children. In Kamishli, children are freezing in their schools, while here we simply talk. Now, we are not going to see a decentralized Syria. We're going to see a power vacuum in which IS will thrive. Let's not abandon the Kurds. Anyone who agrees to abandoning the Kurds shouldn't be surprised to see terror return in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Zovko.
Madam Commissioner, the situation in Syria remains extremely fragile, and once again it is civilians and minorities who are bearing the heaviest burden. From the very beginning of the political transition, I have consistently underlined that the protection of all minorities must be at the core of any credible and sustainable solution for Syria. Safeguarding their rights is prerequisite for peace, reconciliation and long-term stability. Syria continues to face a profound absence of legitimate and inclusive governance. There is no functioning parliament, no credible electoral process and no meaningful space for civil participation. This institutional vacuum has only deepened fragmentation and mistrust across communities. At the same time, deepening destabilization through the ongoing destruction of cultural and religious heritage represents an attack on its identity and history. Decades of enforced authoritarian centralization have already demonstrated their failure. Reproducing this model will only lead to renewed conflict and further marginalization of minorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează Daniela.
Mr. Attard.
When ISIS was advancing, many looked away, but the Kurdish forces did not. They fought, they bled, and they died. Not just for their land, but also for our own security here in Europe. Today, the very forces that crushed Daesh risk being dismantled. This is not just morally wrong, but it was also strategically reckless. In Rojava, we saw something rare in Syria and beyond. Women leading, communities coexisting, local self-rule instead of sectarian chaos. And what was our response? The European Commission pledged 600 million to Damascus without real conditionality, no hard guarantees on rights, and no real accountability. This is not foreign policy. In my opinion, this is just wishful thinking. Let's be clear. Support for Syria is good, but it must also mean protection for Kurdish rights, security guarantees, and strict human rights conditionalities. Otherwise, we will betray those who defeated ISIS, and in the meantime, we weaken our own security. Europe must stop being naive. Stability without rights is just an illusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul
Mr. Hovany.
Madam Commissioner, Syria ma nagyon veszélyes irányba halad.
Syria is heading to a very dangerous place now. Plenty of terrorists have been
leashed upon the nation. The government hasn't been able to do much in order to protect minorities. Between 2026 and 27, Syria is going to receive about 620 million in support from the EU. The stability of Syria and respect for minority rights is a basic security interest for Europe. The ISIS may be revived. We have to face this option. Kurdish troops are defending Europe at this point in time. We have to admit it. We remember 2015 when 10 million people had to leave their homes because of ISIS attacks, and it leashed migrants in quantities never seen before on Europe. We have to prevent this from happening.
Mr. Troshu. Madam Troshu.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner. After 15 years of civil war, Syrian suffering continues, and today it's the minorities, the Kurds and the Christians and the Alawites who are suffering. If Europe really wants to help Syria to rebuild, it needs to insist that al-Shura protect minorities. And the report on asylum is a real skylum because it denies the suffering of Christians in Syria, but does not say the worries about the fate of others. The EU needs to ensure the protection of minorities and the end of all complacency with regard to jihadi groups. Syria also needs its Christians to rebuild. Europe also needs to protect itself, and the member states need to be able to strip people of their European nationality and refuse their jihadis to return to Europe, those people who have burnt their passports and been terrorists. And Europe needs to stop being naive.
Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, President, Commissioner and colleagues. The agreement of March 2025 between the Kurds, the SDF and the government promised some hope for the future. However, that is looking increasingly fragile. The blundering attempts by President Trump are no match for the staying power of the European Union, and I believe that the Union has a really critical role now, providing its credibility and its long-term staying power and institutional approach to broker a longer-term peace. This must be matched by long-term support for good governance and support for the political economy of reconciliation. There is no room in complex post-conflict environments for a winner-takes-all approach. It is possible to reconcile the sovereignty of Damascus with the Kurdish aspirations which should be guaranteed. The lessons of Libya, Sudan and other fragile states are clear. When basic needs are ignored and civilian protection is sidelined, violence inevitably returns. In Sudan, we missed the window to support democratic transition. We cannot do the same in Syria. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul Asens Gludra.
Madam Asens-Yodra. Thank you very much. Madam Commissioner, talking about Syria today is also talking about the structural hypocrisy of Europe, because whilst we set sanctions on Iran in the name of human rights, we've got Gaza and we look away when faced with crimes being committed in Syria by Turkey and the Syrians. Human rights. Why sanctions in Iran and not sanctions on Turkey or Syria? Because Turkey has a European border, and because Syria was someone we treated as a terrorist but now is a useful ally. Europe doesn't have a human rights policy. It has an interests policy. We use the Kurds when they're fighting ISIS, but now we've abandoned them. Not useful anymore. Rojava really showed up this cynicism. The women were at the heart of the democratic revolution. When we abandoned Rojava, we abandoned the women. And the question is, what will happen to these women? It's actually what will happen to Europe when it abandons the values it says it defends.
Demirel Özlem.
Thank you. Madam Demirel.
Thank you, President. Well, in the Middle East, we're seeing the cynicism of large powers. They're basically interfering. The Kurds have been distributed over 4 states. For decades, their existence has been denied. They've been suppressed. Nevertheless, they managed to build something that expressed hope, Rojava. It was democratic and there was hope for everyone. They fought ISIS, and as gratitude, they're being sold up the river by the West. Von der Leyen is cooperating with al-Shara, the former IS terrorist, gives him millions in assistance, in spite of massacres being carried out on Alawites, Kurds, and the Druze. We're quiet while Kobani is under siege. But, colleagues, the Kurds have an expression which says, resistance is life. Throughout their history, the Kurds have fought, they're still there, and they will continue to fight for a democratic, sustainable and just solution in the Middle East for all people in Kurdistan. And that's regardless of what the Commission does. They will continue to fight. Thank you.
Dankeschön.
Thank you, Mr. Foulas.
Thank you, Chairman, Commissioner. Northeastern Syria is bleeding again, and when we talk about geopolitical balances, in reality we're talking about human lives. We're talking about women, children, for families living under terror and violence without electricity, without water. The Kurds of the area, the ones who were in the first line against ISIS, fighting ISIS. They fought the jihadists. They sacrificed themselves. They protected not only their land, but international security as well. Together with them, the Christians of Syria, historical communities. Today they're threatened with from disappearing. We cannot abandon the forces who are fighting ISIS. We cannot abandon them. There is a cleansing going on there. Damascus and Ankara are in the first line in this effort. This is the tragic reality. And Turkey has a very heavy responsibility. Those who believe that Turkey is a reliable strategic partner for Europe should notice this. We're going to put a snake in our house, and it's going to bite us. Remember what I'm saying. The European Union must demand real protection for ethnic and religious minorities. Our silence today will make us accomplices tomorrow. Thank you.
Urmează Insir Evin.
Edmundje.
Jin, Jian, Azadi, woman, life, freedom. We have all heard these words, but too few know where they came from. They are the foundation of the Kurdish-led administration in Rojava. They are the words shouted by Kurdish female guerrillas as they stood against ISIS. When others in Syria refused to fight, when the world hesitated, the Kurdish forces of Rojava stood their ground. In the midst of war, they built something rare. Self-rule instead of tyranny, women's leadership instead of oppression, coexistence between Kurds, Arabs and Christians instead of sectarian hatred. Those who defended us must now be defended. Yes, integration matters, but so does respect for ceasefire, so do minority rights, and so does the dignity, culture and education of Kurds and all other communities of Syria. For long, this dress that I'm wearing today and this Kurdish flag was banned in Syria. For Syria to become truly inclusive and truly democratic, it must respect all its communities. Beji Rojava.
Urmează domnul Jaroslav.
Mr. Knott.
Mr. Chairman, the members of the European Parliament, the ongoing violence in northeast Syria is a humanitarian tragedy with devastating consequences for civilians caught between warring parties. Families are displaced, children live in fear, and the basic securities are the constant threat. As parliamentarians committed first and foremost to the security and dignity of our nations and of people everywhere, we must recognise that European stability has a direct link to peace in its neighbourhood. Therefore, we call for a durable and verifiable ceasefire that protects civilians without enabling endless military escalation. A ceasefire must be anchored in respect for local governance structures and be supported by concrete steps towards humanitarian access, reconstruction and regional stability. We urge the international community, including the European Union and its partners, to prioritise civilian protection, uphold humanitarian law and avoid policies that deepen conflict. Europe's role should be one of principled diplomacy, ensuring that peace, order and respect for sovereign communities prevail. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Kanko.
Mr. President and dear colleagues, Madam Commissioner, once again, the Kurds in Syria are being sacrificed on the altar of cynical geopolitics. Their communities that heroically defeated ISIS are being displaced, shelled, and coerced into perilous negotiations in Damascus by a regime backed by extremist militia, freed ISIS fighters, and groups supported by our own NATO ally, Turkey. These are the same Kurds who, with our allies, dismantled the caliphate, only to face betrayal from those who now court a regime built on extremism and terror. Remember, Giuliani is this man who once rejoiced in the 9/11 attacks, who has overseen atrocities against Alawites, Druzes, and now Kurds, and who has released thousands of ISIS prisoners to bolster his ranks, all while shaking hands in the West and promising peace he never delivers. Yet, less than a year ago, the EU pledged $2.5 billion in financial support to the new Syrian regime for 2025 and 2026. A resurgent network of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, remnants on Europe's doorsteps, threatens us all. So, dear colleagues, why are we paying for it? If we abandon the Kurds now, we abandon not only them, but also Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează domnul Willy Sondale.
Thank you. Mr. Sondal.
Speaking in Danish. Kan kurderne i det nordlige Syrien...
Thank you. This really is one of the most important issues that we're discussing today. The Kurds were our allies when we were fighting against IS, which helped us very much, therefore, to support our values. But now, the Kurds are a people who don't see a future in their own country, maybe only in Europe. We need to fight for the Kurds. This is something that's important for us too. And we need to defend their rights to live in freedom, so that their language, their culture, their traditions are all protected. We need protection of the Kurds. It's vital. Thank you.
Urmează Georgios.
Thank you. Mr. Giorgio.
Commissioner, there is no good extremism, not useful violence. We are doing the same fatal mistake in Syria. Once again, we are naming violence, instability, and covert jihadism as a transition towards democracy. The Commission of the United Nations for Syria noted that in 25 we had very horrible events in the coastal areas, in the western areas of the country. Killings, violence, thousands displaced from the cause of the Alawites. Now they're moving against the Kurds. The European Commission supports politically Giuliani, who is a jihadist, and the new regime, and Turkey, of course, which in agreement with Giuliani is increasing the violence against the Kurds and is murdering Christian populations. I'm asking directly, where did you lose your moral compass? How can you legalize crimes against civilians? You should stand on the side of the victims at last. No with those who commit all these crimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Madam Commissioner, the international community has welcomed the political agreement and the ceasefire agreement reached between the Syrian government and the SDF from March 2025 and January this year. Yet it's crucial that these significant steps towards de-escalation are carried out in a way that will finally bring peace and protection to all citizens, of course, to all ethnic and religious communities in the country. In this sense, the Institute for the Documentation of Human Rights Violations against Religious Minorities in the Levant has published recently on February 3rd a report documenting and denouncing that Alawite, Druze, Kurdish, Yazidi and Christian communities in Syria face targeted killings, abductions, forced displacement and other forms of religious persecution. So what can the European Union do in this situation? Well, I will suggest at least two things. First, in addition to all the efforts that the Commission for the Mediterranean is doing, I think the Commission should also finally appoint a special representative for religious freedom. It's something that has been promised a year ago. It's time to deliver on it. Second, to promote a federal constitutional framework in Syria, granting local and minority self-governance. I think that the EU should support the right of all citizens in the country to have an inclusive political system that will guarantee peace and stability. Thank you.
Hvala. Thank you. Mr. Shida.
Peace and in Syria is not only essential for a stable Middle East, but it is also important for Europeans' security. And right now, those were our closest partners in fighting for this security, namely the Kurdish communities in northeast Syria, are living with an unstable ceasefire following weeks of persecution and dramatic killing. A long-term stable Syria can only be built on an inclusive society. Inclusivity for the Kurdish, for the Druze, for the Syriacs, for the Christians, for the Alawites, for the Yazidi, for the Ismaili and the Sunni Arab communities. And of course, Syrian sovereignty must have a precedence, but this is not only a question of a country's right of sovereignty. It is also a question of human rights and of self-determination. And therefore, I think we have to be clear. What's going on now in Syria is not good, and we have to work together with all those which are asking for a stable Syria, that we establish an inclusive society there.
Thank you. Mr. Milacek.
Pani komisarz, Wysoki Parlamencie.
Commissioner, colleagues. The Syrian crisis, which is a civil war, stems from the failure of a range of world powers. Barack Obama talked about the red line with regard to chemical weapons, but that didn't work. And then we turned a blind eye to the activities of ISIS. Russia stepped in 2015, and its actions have led to the death of thousands of people and to chaos, and it has pushed Syria into this civil war. Now, when we look at the violence in Syria, in particular against religious minorities, it's a real tragedy. Thousands of people have been displaced, and many of them will come to Europe. Prisoners have fled from the prisons, and many of those have European citizenship, and that's a risk for us. We've seen how the Druze, the Kurds, have been attacked, and the regime there doesn't respect human rights at all. And so we have to cooperate with the US, we have to protect our borders, and we need to solve this problem.
Madam Langenziemper.
Werter Herr Präsident, in Syrien, in Damaskus, ich glaube schon, dass Sie...
I don't know whether the president in Damascus is listening, but I would say to you, you may have won a war, but there's no peace. You've been in power for a year, now, elected, unelected, whatever, you talked about an inclusive Syria. This is something that you and your transition government has constantly mentioned, but we're talking about massacres, hunger, exclusion, etc. We're not seeing an inclusive Syria. You may well have won a war, but you haven't won the peace. The Druze, the Alawites, and now the Kurds have been particularly affected. And Commissioner, that it should be clear to us what is happening. I mean, you said that we are the largest donors. Where is the money going? The right to self-determination is a fundamental right. Deciding that you can be free and independent is a fundamental right. That needs to be clear to all of us. Women need to be protected. Women have to have rights, because otherwise the situation will continue to be that you've won the war, Mr. Al-Shara, but not the peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Clausen.
Thank you. I will speak in Danish. I Syrien blev unge kurdiske.
Now, for Syria to become a country for all its citizens, Turkey needs to stop interfering. We need to work for that. We need to exert pressure for that. We need to exert pressure on Syria to ensure that it really provides proper protection for its minorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mazilidis.
Dėkoju pirmininkė, komisarė, kolegos. Padėtis šiaurės.
President, Commissioner, colleagues, the situation in northeast Syria remains tense. We welcome the extension of the ceasefire between the Syrian government troops and the Syrian democratic forces, but at the moment it seems that we're just trying to avoid more escalation and to avoid a security vacuum in that region, which could be used by revanchist groups, those loyal to former President Bashar al-Assad or IS. Now, the fight against terrorism doesn't just mean arresting people and putting them in prison. We need a proper mechanism to ensure that people stay in prisons. Local support, international support for local partners needs to be continued. Otherwise, local forces will be left alone to deal with radicals. It seems to me that the government of Syria, the Kurdish government, etc., need to be given incentives to respect minorities, to ensure that humanitarian corridors are respected, and all of that needs to be done to ensure peace and security in the northeast of Syria as soon as possible. Thank you. More. Thank you, Mr. Jalul Moore.
Good evening. 5 months ago, we led a mission, the first one to Syria, to witness the country's transition. We spoke with organizations, communities, civilians, Syrians, who, regardless their religion or background, asked for one simple thing: stability and peace. After years of brutal authoritarianism, that is the least they deserve. The images from January are terrifying: cruelty, persecution, terrorism, and the displacement of hundreds of civilians in northern Syria. And this reminds us of a past which we must never return to. Kurds do not deserve this. Alawites, Sunnis, and Arabs and Christians do not deserve this. In short, Syrians who have fought for a better country do not deserve this. We call for an absolute commitment to equality for all Syrians, and for sure we condemn violence. We demand the transitional government to guarantee a ceasefire and to continue the path of political and legal recognition for all peoples, as it did with the Decree 13 on Kurdish recognition. Syrian democracy will only be achieved with all voices included and with full territorial integrity. Respect for human rights is the only path for the European Union support. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Urmează domnul Cristian Terheș.
Mr. Terheș.
Thank you. At the heart of any lasting peace in Syria lies the protection of its ethnic and religious minorities. Syria is not a monocultural state. It is a civilization shaped over centuries by coexistence and plurality of multiple communities. Alawite, Druze, Kurdish, Yazidi, Assyrian, Armenian and ancient Christian communities continue to endure targeted killing, abduction, forced displacement, religious persecution and the systemic destruction of their sacred sites. After decades of authoritarian rules and 14 years of devastating civil war, Syria remains fractured by power vacuums that extremist actors have been quick to exploit. The ceasefire established in late January offers a moment of cautious hope, but it remains fragile and incomplete. Protecting minorities is therefore not only a moral obligation, it is a security imperative for Syria. Syria's future must recognize a fundamental truth of its history. Its unity and power stands in diversity, not in uniformity. No community should ever be sacrificed for a false vision of unity. Thank you.
Mulțumesc. Urmează Ana Miranda Paz.
Mrs. Anna Miranda Paz now, please.
Je donne une grande salutation aux représentatifs kurdes.
I'd like to welcome the Kurdish representatives who are up there. The Kurds can wait no longer. Turkey is letting them be massacred at Kobane, and what's the European Union doing? Nothing. When we needed people to fight Islamic State, the Kurds stood up and did it for us. They defeated ISIS. But basically, Syria has become a battlefield for various external powers who want to exploit its resources to the detriment of its peoples. We need to sanction entities and individuals, and we need to ensure that humanitarian corridors are working properly to help people who are in areas under siege, particularly Rojava. We would also like to see recognition for humanitarian organizations and also recognition of the rights of women. There are democratic systems in Rojava that we want to see repeated elsewhere. We continue to work to ensure that Syria recognizes the rights of Kurdish people. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup. Urmează Jonas Sjöstedt.
Mr. Sjöstedt.
Herr talman. Det brukar sägas att
Thank you. Throughout history, the Kurds have been betrayed by their friends on various occasions. This must not happen again. They have paid a huge price fighting the Islamic State. Thousands gave their lives, not just for their freedom, but for ours. Women managed to have freedoms that they didn't have in many other parts of the region. And the dream was that different languages, cultures, ethnic groups could coexist. All of this now is under threat. And it's our responsibility to ensure that we actually have Kurdish autonomy. We need to put the Damascus government under pressure because we really have to ensure that Rojava is protected and the rights of minorities are protected too. If not, no help. Thank you.
Mrs. Neradova, please.
A ceasefire was signed in Syria on 30th of January. Any pause in fighting is welcomed. But a ceasefire alone doesn't mean safety for civilians. In recent months, across parts of Syria, civilians, including Kurds and other minorities, face insecurity, intimidation and serious human rights abuses. Even after the ceasefire, fear remains widespread. This is a human rights crisis that should concern Europe. Kurdish forces played a big role in defeating ISIS, and as their position weakens, security on the ground becomes more fragile, increasing risks for civilians and regional stability. Europe must stand clearly on the side of human dignity. Protecting minorities and defending basic rights must be central to any engagement on Syria. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează Thijs Reuten.
Thank you, Mr. Reuten now.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues.
This could have been the year in which Syria finally saw an end to the bloodshed and the start of transition to democracy, building accountable institutions, restoring justice and recognizing rights of all citizens. But the ongoing siege of Kobani and atrocities also on January 9th against Kurds in Aleppo and their forced displacement tell a different story. A small bright spot may be the agreement between Damascus and the SDF now, but the process of gradual integration must come with full rights for and protection of Kurdish citizens. Real stability can only come with respect for all minorities, Kurds, Druze, Alawites, Christians and others, with peaceful coexistence between these communities based on principles of transitional justice. And Europe cannot impose this, but we must make our financial support conditional. Being the largest humanitarian donor is not enough. If we are bystanders, fragile stability may once again collapse with far-reaching security risks. Thank you.
Dank u wel. Urmează Headi Headis.
Mr. Headi, please.
The fall of Assad didn't bring stability. On the contrary, we went into another dictatorship of extremely Islamist. From the beginning, we expressed our worries, and unfortunately, we were proven right. A few months ago, we had slaughters of Christians and Alawis, and then the Druze were slaughtered. Without respecting human rights today, the governor of Latakia decided to forbid the use of makeup for women who are working in the public sector. While a few days ago, we saw jihadists escaping from the prisons in northeastern Syria. At the same time, the Kurds are slaughtered by the terrorists of Al-Jolani, cooperating with another terrorist of the area, Turkey. The democratic transition and the stability in Syria will not come through financing terrorists that are wearing a suit. They wore a suit, they wore a tie, and they pretend that they're Democrats. The return to Syria of all those who escaped from Assad regime is a basic precondition for a democratic transition and of stability, for stability. Thank you.
Nicolas Farantouris.
Mr. Farantouris.
A year ago, I was returning from Damascus after a personal visit to Syria. And among the slaughtering of Alawis and Christians, I had warned for what was to follow, because I had seen with my own eyes what was going on. Then Europe was silent. Europe did not take the necessary measures, not even when we had the bomb attack on the Orthodox Church of Prophet Elias. Today, after the slaughtering of Alawis, Christians, of the Druze, of the Yazidis, they are slaughtering Kurds. I am requesting to return the sanctions. I demand to stop the financing if the attacks do not stop against ethnic or religious communities, and if the country directly does not move into democratic elections with a representative constitution for all the communities of Syria.
Urmează Selin Imar.
Mrs. Imari.
Merci, Président. Madame.
President, Commissioner. We have a whole community living in fear, the Kurds, who were a vital link in fighting IS. In spite of the ceasefire, the massacres in 2025 of Druze and Alawites are still in our memories. We can't have this fight against the minorities in Syria. In the last report of the Migration Agency, it explains that persecution of Christians is rare, but what we are seeing is communities being rubbed out, people being kidnapped. Rare. France has heard of 9,000 people who have been detained without a fair trial and who are persecuted to an extent of justifying asylum as long as they are no longer members of ISIS. Europe is unfortunately acting as though we were still in the last century. The executioners have changed their image, and it means that we really have to decide in Europe, are we going to support former terrorists or Christians? Thank you.
Mr. Assis. Thank you, President, Commissioner, colleagues. Syria freed itself from the criminal dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad, but it hasn't freed itself from violence, which continues to blight the lives of citizens. We are seeing a humanitarian crisis. Now we're concerned with the northeast of Syria. Kurdish communities have had self-autonomy for a long time, and they are fighting for democratic self-governance, and this is important. Now, the problems in the country will only be dealt with politically and institutionally. The European Union, therefore, needs to support a sustainable ceasefire. We also need to insist that there be no human rights violations. What Europe can't do is fund the reconstruction of the country if it means the destruction of various communities, particularly those who have constantly fought for the values and human rights that inspire us. Northeast Syria needs to be seen as the basis for the future Syria. We need to see peaceful cohabitation, and we need to see fundamental rights guaranteed for all communities. Anything else will lead to violence. Thank you. Mr. Frakos now, please.
Moment of being frozen. The politicians are frozen internationally. The West, after Turkish instructions, is supporting the jihadists in the leadership of Syria. And behind the scene, everybody's frozen. On the scene, one sees hypocrisy. Everybody is a hypocrite. Accomplices, real criminals, all those who know but are silent. Christians were 12% of Syria 15 years ago. Today, they're just 2%. Our brothers are being murdered, are being raped. They're being persecuted every day. In June, 25 Greek Orthodox people were murdered during their mass in Prophet Elias. And the right hand showed the left. The jihadists said that the attack was done by the Islamic State. And the jihadist terrorists who cut heads from Syria should be sent away. Elections should take place. Syria has no government, but it has the members of a coup d'etat. Christian, Kurds and Druzes are persecuted, and we support them. We shouldn't be silent anymore. Thank you.
Urmează doamna Isabel Benjumea.
Mrs. Benjumea, please.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. The news that we're getting from Syria and the numbers of people who have been killed, expelled, or whatever are terrible. We're seeing extreme violence, particularly against minorities. And in that context, Christians are once again being persecuted and massacred. 1.5 million Christians were in Syria before the war started. There are now 300,000 left. Persecutions and killings which have increased during the last year as terrorists and fundamentalists have taken more territory. And the result is that Syria has now joined the list of countries where there is extreme persecution against Christians. The fall of the dictatorship and the change of regime in Syria generated great expectations, but we can only measure the supposed changes if we genuinely work to ensure that there is a state where there is religious freedom, where women's rights are everywhere, and where there's no discrimination for sexual orientation based on sexual orientation, race, or whatever. And when you have a justice system that deals with those who carry out violence, currently they're acting with impunity. And what's the European Union going to do? We're going to keep sending money without asking for results?
Urmează doamna Cecilia Strada.
Thank you, Mrs. Strada now.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. We cannot avoid the reality that we are looking in silence while the forces of the army is advancing in northern Syria. We have abandoned the Kurds to their fate. The Kurds who fought against ISIS, the Kurds who have put together a feminist ecological government together. And we are losing credibility in the eyes of the Kurds in the whole region. And if we want bottom-up democracy, there are some things we can do. We can open up humanitarian corridors and monitor the ceasefire. We can introduce conditionality of human rights in our relations with Syria. And we need to... the lives of tens of thousands of people are at stake here. We cannot leave them to their fate. Thank you.
Urmează Bert Jan Rausen.
Mr. Rausen now, please.
Dank u wel, voorzitter, beste collega's.
Thank you, President, colleagues. The Kurds feel betrayed in the fight against IS. We let them do our work for us. But now that Sharia has come to power, the EU and the US are just leaving them there to rot. Now, al-Sharia speaks sweet words regarding minorities, but in reality, the Kurds, the Christians, the Alawites are in fear of their lives, and that's understandable given what's happened in the past few months. The EU cannot sit with on its hands. Enough beautiful words. We need real guarantees of financial support for minorities. Their rights need to be protected, and our support mustn't be for jihadi militias. That sort of guarantee the support needs to go in the right direction. Thank you.
Kostas Mavridis.
Mr. Mavridis, please.
The Al-Shara jihadist regime, the Islamic State, and the Turkish State. The war crimes carried out by this evil alliance are well documented by information from the ground, testimonies, and regional reports against specific population groups based on their ethnic and religious identities. War crimes such as targeting of civilian areas, destruction of infrastructure, executions, torture, desecration of cemeteries, burning of the corpses of the dead, killing of children, abductions, forced disappearances, and much more, and release of ISIS criminals. Turkey's participation is central and self-evident. Turkish artillery, Turkish drones, Turkish-speaking military, same Turkish tactics as elsewhere. The Kurds, an indigenous people of Mesopotamia that sacrificed 12,000 fighters in the fight against the Islamic State, is abandoned again. This is a shameful immorality and a horrible geopolitical mistake. Madam Commissioner, when any EU official will meet the Damascus jihadist regime for funding and collaboration, not in my name, and most likely not in the name of this House.
Ευχαριστώ. Urmează Carlo Ciccioli.
Mr. Ciccioli, please.
Grazie. La situazione nel nord-est.
Thank you very much. The situation in northeast Syria is still dramatic, with violence against Kurdish civilians, humanitarian crisis particularly affecting minorities, women, Christians, children. For decades, Syria was the only Arab state with a socialist, secular type government. And now it has many minorities, Christians, Kurds, Alawites, Druze, and so on and so forth. With the choice of political Islam in 2011, devastating civil war started, a multicultural war, which led to fragmentation. Now the EU should actually support a genuine ceasefire, a verifiable ceasefire, guaranteeing protection to minorities and stopping terrorist repression. The West has to be able to make responsible choices, avoiding the errors of the past and contributing genuinely to peace and stability in the region.
Zadnji dogovor o premirju je redka priložnost za mir v Siriji in ta ne temelji na dialogu in ne na orožju. Stabilnost ni brez pravičnosti.
Thank you very much. Now, peace cannot be based on weapons. We cannot have peace without inclusion. We need the ceasefire agreement to be properly implemented, because any violation of the ceasefire means no access to healthcare, etc., and just more suffering for the civilian population. We need to see the political organisation across the country include everyone. There's no democracy without the votes of everyone. In addition, we have the prisons, which are holding former ISIS fighters, and that's something that's extremely important for Syria, but also for the world. So that needs to be dealt with too. Democracy and security go hand in hand. We need to help Syria to achieve a brighter and more democratic future. Assistance needs to be provided to help them build peace. Thank you.
Dear colleagues, the situation in Syria is fragile and complex. First, especially in northeast of Syria, UN reports that more than 170,000 displaced people need humanitarian assistance. Second, another big issue are the detention camps, like in Al-Roj or in Al-Hol. I had the chance to visit an Austrian woman with her 2 children in the camp Al-Roj. Over 28,000 people are in these camps. 8,000 are foreigners. And we have to have security in our minds. Many of the people are brainwashed by ISIS. And third, we have to see the situation, the difficult situation of the Kurdish people. The largest, by far largest, minority in Syria, with more than 2 million people. Kurds have played a big and a key role in the fight against the terrorists of ISIS. We should not forget this, and the rights and security must be ensured. What we need is a sustainable ceasefire. A ceasefire that ensures security, the respect of international law, and the protection of civilians. We have to support the Syrian government, but we have to be also on alert. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, colleagues, we have the Catch the Eye. I will give priority to the people who have followed the debate all the time. I start with Mark Botenga for 1 minute.
Yes. Thank you, President. Yes, I want to point out the elephant in the room, because you've mentioned sovereignty of Syria, but no one here condemned the fact that Israel wiped out the entire Syrian military infrastructure, taking advantage of the regime change. No one here is condemning the fact that the United States still have troops in Syria, and they should withdraw, otherwise we cannot speak of sovereignty. No one here dares to speak about the territorial integrity. Why? Why can we not say that the Israeli troops that are illegally occupying parts of Syria should withdraw? And then look at the Kurds. The Kurds celebrated in 2015 as the forces that were fighting ISIS, Daesh. They got US support. The US took advantage of it to establish military bases in the rich, oil-rich regions of Syria. Today, they can be killed. They can be killed because now we support the other leader. They're learning basically what some US analysts already said. Being an enemy of the US may be dangerous, being its friend is fatal. If this is true for Europe as well, we are ashamed.
Okay, urmează Katerina Konečná.
Mrs. Konečná, please.
Předsedo, tak dlouho podporoval tento barák turecké, izraelské a americké imperiální zájmy v Sýrii.
Well, we have for a long time defended Turkish interests in Syria. And the Syrian government is now trying to destroy the Kurds. all the allies of the Kurds have now washed their hands of them and basically allowed the Syrian government to do what they want. What we're seeing is just going to lead to further violence, and particularly against the Kurdish minority. So I hope that we'll be doing everything possible to try and ensure that there's not more conflict and that the rights of minorities are respected. We want to see northeast Syria return to normal life. But this has been a black time. I don't think we'll be able to forget the fact that the EU has allowed the terrorists to massacre the Kurds. Thank you.
Sebastian Tinkinen.
Mr. Tinkinen.
Thank you, Mr. President. Religious cleansing is underway in northeast Syria. After Bashar al-Assad's fall, we were promised a new Syria. However, the extrajudicial executions, destruction of property and deliberate attacks carried out by extremist Islamist groups in the Syrian transitional government speak a climate of open religious hostility. This is unacceptable. The Kurdish people have been among our most reliable partners in the fight against ISIS. They have defended not only their freedom, but Europe's security as well. Yet, the silence in Europe is deafening. Europe must stand for clear principles, the protection of civilians and zero tolerance for terrorism. The Syrian transitional government that engages in ethnic and religious violence must not be granted legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Urmează Kostas Papadakis.
Mr. Papadakis.
15 years of imperialistic intervention in Syria. We don't have any excuses that were used by Europe and NATO, and all the Greek government supporting this intervention till today. Liberators and bring in democracy, supposedly. The ex-terrorists today are jihadist friends of NATO, and they were supported with guns and money, the European Union, Turkey, and the United States, and Israel. And Israel is occupying Syrian territory. Refugees were created in Syria, and now the Kurds are refugees. And the United States, after taking advantage of the Kurds, they betrayed them. Everything for competitiveness of United States fighting China and Russia for competitiveness and vying for energy resources. The people of Syria could break this circle by struggling for its own interests against any imperialist coalition.
Mr. Zipa, last speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Dear people of Europe, 1 month after the regime change in Syria, I had the opportunity to travel through northern Syria. And I had a meeting with Maslum Abdi, the commander-in-chief of the SDF, of the predominantly Kurdish forces that are now fighting with the central government. And one thing that I remember till this day is the wall of memorabilia that the commander-in-chief of the SDF had in this meeting room. He had tokens of remembrance from his collaboration with the CIA, with the Russians, with the Israelis, with the Germans, even with the Turkish. So with many, many different nations, many different organizations, these people fought together under changing circumstances. I think the question that we have to ask ourselves, do we want a Syria that keeps on being a playing field for big powers, or do we want a Syria where we contribute to the peace that the people can actually live there? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Sieper. And now, Madam Commissioner Šuica, you have heard so many views. We wonder what your reaction will be.
Thank you so much. I was listening carefully. First, many of you asked about financing, so I will start with financing controls. All of you know that financing is accompanied by strong controls and conditions. So we are screening all partners, contractors, subcontractors against EU and UN sanctions lists. For example, schools. For school rehabilitation projects, we use satellite images and we are monitoring to verify that facilities are rebuilt and used for education and not repurposed for military or political use. So the Commission applies strict safeguards to the implementation of the European Union funds. We have monitoring programs, including regular reports from implementing partners in local verification missions, but also results-oriented monitoring exercises. So the European Union funds will not be channeled via transitional government, but the transitional authorities are closely involved and consulted, and they are one of the key beneficiaries through capacity building. So, for the time being, the Commission will work with implementing partners on the ground who are, as you know, first implementing partner were United Nations and Member State agencies who are present on the ground, but also civil society organizations. So every euro is controlled and can be withdrawn immediately. This is about financing. On some other issues I will try to reply, but it's not possible to reply to all of you. So European Union, is closely monitoring the situation in Aleppo and northeast Syria, including through our delegation in Damascus, and will remain vigilant about respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. We will continue supporting a peaceful and truly inclusive transition. When I say inclusive, I mean inclusive, and also national reconciliation, which is very important. Also, to reply to some of you, to Mr. Sanchez Amor, we are advocating for a genuinely inclusive political transition, but for this to happen, we need integration of military, security and civilian institutions into unified state structures, alongside meaningful political and local participation, which is essential. So the full protection of Kurdish rights is also crucial. So we are not interfering, we are accompanying, because he said that we are interfering, we are accompanying Syrians on their journey to transition. We are supporting the minorities very directly and also through channeling the reforms. For Madam El Sahlani, I fully agree on the need for functional and real ceasefire, and I share her view and view of many of you whom I heard for the need of protection of Kurdish women. The Kurdish community, all of us know, is an integral part to Syria's social fabric and have an important role in building the new Syria. On some other, because many of you left, on children freezing, we heard a lot. Our DG ECHO is providing emergency support, including heating and infant supplies when access allows. So the money goes also there, just to understand. So civilian protection is so important, and it is interesting in the building of civil society. To Mr. Stier, who also left, he was talking about Alevites, Druze, Christians and Jews. They need, of course, to be protected, but I want to thank him for his valuable ideas on federal approach and the inclusive society. Returning sanctions, that will not help any of these ethnic and religious communities. This will move us back. So we don't think that this is a good idea. The situation is not frozen. The situation is very fragile, with many actors on the scene, with the trust among them. We are doing what we can in this context in order to advance peace and stability. To conclude, I think this debate has shown the big concern all of us share here, but it has also shown the enormous care and trust for the people of Syria. We should continue the work together to help the people of Syria, whatever our differences can be. I think they need our joint and concrete efforts. So I want to thank you for this debate. just to say that the way Damascus handles SDF integration is a litmus test for the inclusivity of the Syrian transition process, and it will significantly impact the dynamics between the transitional authorities and the different Syrian communities. We as the European Union will continue to have a structured engagement with the Syrian transitional authorities and civil society. With the Member States, we are eager to reinforce our engagement under a Team Europe approach. You know, it's not always easy because Member States have different bilateral positions. We will also, as I said, remain engaged bilaterally, regionally, and through the global coalition to prevent the resurgence of Daesh and other extremist groups in Syria. Preventing Daesh, I think it is, many of you mentioned this, it remains a collective security priority, and it is key for ensuring that for the security of Syria, for the security of the region, but also for the security of Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner, for your intervention, but also for answering the questions raised by colleagues. So, am primit o propunere de rezoluție depuse pe baza declarației.
Thank you very much. We've received a motion for a resolution on the basis of the statement. The debate is concluded and the vote will take place on Thursday.
Următorul punct de pe ordinea de zi este declarația Comisiei.
Commission statement. Urgent need to address the humanitarian catastrophe in Sudan and to achieve a sustainable peace.
We say hello to Commissioner Habib. Madame la Commissaire.
Commissioner, when you're ready, you have the floor.
Monsieur le Président.
President.
For organising this exchange at a moment of great concern for Sudan and the entire region. This offers visibility to a terrible, endless conflict which does not attract enough attention, unfortunately. The horrific humanitarian crisis in Sudan has endured already more than 1,000 days, and the crisis only keeps getting worse. What we are witnessing is the result of a brutal power struggle for resources sustained by armed actors who show no mercy for civilian life. What is happening in Darfur and the Kordofans is particularly shocking. There were horrific attacks on civilians by the Rapid Support Forces during the capture of El Fasher, North Darfur, at the end of last year, and this is unacceptable. The EU has always been clear about its asks. We reiterated our stance in the Council conclusions that we adopted last October. We will continue to push for coordinated international pressure towards a ceasefire, for immediate humanitarian access to reach those in need, for a civilian transition and for accountability. Those who block aid commit atrocities and enable this war must be held accountable. On this last point, the recent adoption by the Council of a new package of restrictive measures represents an important step in reinforcing our collective effort to promote accountability and support a path towards peace. It shows also that we are keeping our eyes on Sudan and that we will not shy away from using this tool again. The EU consistently called for concrete measures to protect civilians, including humanitarian workers, and for immediate and unhindered humanitarian access to reach those in need. Despite many mediation attempts, the international community has so far failed to stop this tragedy. Engaging with the parties to the conflict is essential, but not sufficient. We must match this by sustained pressure on the regional powers that continue to fuel the conflict, using Sudan as the ground for a proxy war while publicly calling for peace. The mediation efforts, notably those of the Quad, are important, but they must translate into concrete influence over those they support on the ground. Honourable members, the humanitarian situation in Sudan is beyond catastrophic. An estimated 33.7 million people, 2/3 of the country's population, are expected to need aid this year. The humanitarian situation in the west of the country is particularly shocking. My services just carried out a mission to Tawila, shelter to those who fled the horrendous attacks by the Rapid Support Forces on Zamzam camp and on Al-Fashir, and from a small Sudanese town, over the space of a few months, it became the biggest internal displacement camp in the world, hosting more than 700,000 displaced people. Humanitarian partners have stepped up their response. Their commitment is truly commendable, as is the generosity of the local communities who have welcomed those who have been internally displaced despite their own difficulties. Most humanitarian organisations working in Tawila and elsewhere in Sudan receive European funding and support from EU humanitarian air bridges delivering life-saving relief items. But needs far exceed the resources. Only an estimated 15 to 30% of needs are currently being met in Tawila. Despite the enormous needs, humanitarian space continues to shrink in Sudan, which is one of the deadliest places in the world for aid workers. Across the country, bureaucratic barriers also continue to block humanitarian assistance. We reiterate our call to all parties for safe, full and unhindered access for humanitarian organisations. Honourable members, responding to the humanitarian crisis in Sudan remains a priority for the European Commission. We are using every tool we have: humanitarian diplomacy, funding, air bridges and sea freight. On humanitarian advocacy, I visited Chad and the Sudanese border last April. We have hosted or co-hosted key events since the crisis began, and we will continue this engagement with another senior officials meeting on the 26th of March, and we will co-host the Sudan conference on 15 April this year. I commend the German government for organising it. The co-hosts could be open to consider inviting the parties only in return for clear steps for peace. We will also strengthen our regular presence in Sudan to monitor EU-funded operations and work with our humanitarian partners. Between 2023 and 2025, we have made available nearly 700 million for the Sudan crisis and the neighbouring countries. With this funding, we support humanitarian partners wherever they are across the country and in the region, based on the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, independence and impartiality. In addition, in the last 3 years, the Commission committed €225 million of development funds for Sudan, firmly aligned with the humanitarian development peace nexus approach, emphasising resilience building for food security, resilience and health and humanitarian rights protection, skills and employment and education. These figures are significant, but the funding gaps remain huge and massive consequences. We count on the Parliament's continued support on this matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we start with the first round of speakers on behalf of the political group. And now, on behalf of the group of European People's Party, Madam Terlak.
Beste collega.
Colleagues, I'd like to take you to a forgotten war which has left young people and families just to rot. And over 3 years, they haven't had any outlook on a peaceful future. It's no longer on our TV. It doesn't mean that the war isn't ongoing. And I'd like to draw your attention in particular to the children who are raped and who are pushed into being child soldiers. Sexual violence and hunger are used systematically as weapons. In the conflict, you have a fight between the SSF and the RSF. And human rights abuses there are just beyond words. They block humanitarian goods and they deliberately attack hospitals. But it's not only these two parties that are fighting, but they are supported by countries outside. I condemn these countries who say in public that they are working towards peace, but it's quite the opposite. It's very important that Europe look at these practices and what's happening there. Europe needs to take its place there in stopping the war. Humanitarian assistance needs to come through, and the children of Sudan have a right to a peaceful future. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the Group of Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, Madam May.
Ja, dank u wel, voorzitter. Voorzitter, terwijl wij monitoren en debatteren, voltrekt zich in Sudan een zware humanitaire crisis. Een van de zwaarste ter wereld. En de wreedheid van de rebellengroep RSF tart alle verbeelding. Systematische moorden op etnische groepen, uithongering, massaverkrachtingen van vrouwen en van meisjes. En het antwoord van de commissie als wij vragen een onderzoek te doen naar de terreurdaden van de RSF is: we houden het in de gaten. Dat is toch geen antwoord? Waarom? Omdat wij afhankelijk zijn van grondstoffen, van Soedanees goud? Of omdat de lobby van de Verenigde Arabische Emiraten, of omdat de lobby van de Verenigde Arabische Emiraten echte actie blokkeert? Humanitaire hulp is noodzakelijk, maar alleen is het dweilen met de kraan open. Aan onze buitengrenzen aarzelen we niet met sancties, diplomatieke druk en maximale isolatie. Sudan mag geen uitzondering zijn. Dus gaat de commissie nu eindelijk in op onze vraag, op ons verzoek van dit parlement, om een onderzoek te doen naar de RSF of deze op de terroristenlijst geplaatst zou kunnen worden. En gaat de commissie dit agenderen op de Raad Buitenlandse Zaken van 23 februari. Dank u wel.
Mr. Bielan.
Bardzo dziękuję. W Sudanie trwa...
Thank you, President. The war in Sudan is one that neither side can win. It's the citizens that are paying the price of that. War crimes are being carried out, which are horrendous, against children too, with no thought to the rights of civilians. One of the reasons why it's so difficult to resolve this conflict is the involvement of the Muslim Brotherhood, which has a lot of dominance in the region. Christians are being increasingly persecuted. Humanitarian standards are being broken. We can't just give up faced with this situation. We need to introduce restrictions, and we have to ensure that those that are guilty are brought to court for crimes against humanity. We need humanitarian aid for Christians too. Thank you.
On behalf of Renew Europe, Mr. Otjen.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, colleagues, with 11.8 million displaced people, including 7 million IDPs inside Sudan, this remains the world's largest displacement crisis. Number of refugees in Darfur and Kordofan are still rising, and violence continues to escalate. Millions are facing acute hunger and famine-like conditions. However, there are more than 3 million people that have returned, notably to Khartoum, but that doesn't mean that they are returning to safety or stability, but they are returning to destroyed homes. Children are dying from severe acute malnutrition, health systems have collapsed, and humanitarian access is systematically blocked. Hunger is used as a weapon of war. It's a threefold challenge, and from my understanding we need to continue to provide humanitarian assistance for those returning to Khartoum. We need to sustain funding for refugees within and outside of the country, and we need to push as well our partner countries like Egypt to lift up to their commitments. We need to scale up humanitarian funding, but also ensure safe, unhindered access on the ground, and I wish that the Commission pushes as well for stronger diplomatic pressure, including targeted sanctions against those obstructing aid and those enabling the conflict from outside. This would be the right response from the European Union, and this is what we have to push for. Thank you.
For the group of the Greens, Bella Riel, for 1 minute.
Nearly 3 years into the brutal war in Sudan, civilians are still paying the price, not only of violence, but also of international inaction. As lawmakers, our responsibility is very clear. We must stop treating this war as a distant internal conflict. This is a proxy war fueled by external actors and militias that profit from chaos. The EU must support peace negotiations that generally put Sudanese people first and cut financial support to those blocking the ceasefire. That includes designating the Rapid Support Forces as a terrorist organisation rather than hesitating one individual at a time. Europe must choose politics driven only by strategic advantage or the courage to put civilian lives first. To every European citizen, I urge you, speak up about Sudan. Thank you.
Next speaker on behalf of the left, Madam Salis.
Thank you. In Sudan, over 12 million people have been displaced. Epidemics and famine are spreading. Essential infrastructure has collapsed. Refugees find closed borders and degrading conditions. And yet, the international community, including the EU, is largely ignoring this war. A horrific war that is the toxic result of illegal gold trafficking, of a popular revolution crushed in blood, of a betrayed democratic transition, of armed militias sustained by regional and international powers. Sudan now is flooded with weapons coming from all over the world. The EU itself, under the Valletta Action Plan aimed at stop migration, used to provide military equipment. The Emirates are supplying weapons to the RSF, including weapons purchased from the EU. This must stop. Arms sales to all parties must end. Disarmament is a necessary condition to break the spiral of violence. The current arms embargo limited to Darfur is not enough. It must be extended to the whole Sudan. Let's support the civil society and the diaspora. Let's support those who carried out the revolution.
Now we open the blue card procedure and move to the next speaker, Mr. Galler, for 1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, colleagues. We discuss this forgotten war, Sudan's unbearable humanitarian catastrophe, hunger, displacement, despair. I welcome and acknowledge that we as European Union are doing what we are always best at, that is delivering humanitarian aid. It is the least that we can do and expect what the people expect from us, and it's good to hear the figures and all our efforts. And I also welcome that we are, as the European Union, co-hosting this Sudan conference in April. It is a due effort that needs to be undertaken. But the Sudanese people are trapped in a conflict that would collapse without foreign weapons financing and political sponsorship. This is not a war fought only by Sudan's own factions. It is a proxy struggle in which regional and global actors compete for influence, resources and strategic corridors, and they do so with Sudanese lives. Behind every airstrike and every massacre stand supply chains of arms, cash and political cover that cross borders and continents. The Rapid Support Forces are armed and funded through networks linked to the United Arab Emirates, while remnants of the Wagner network continue to exploit Sudan's gold and navigate ties with both sides. The Sudanese armed forces rely on drones and material from Iran and receive military and logistical support from Egypt, Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So let us be clear, this war endures because outsiders feed it. If we truly care about Sudan's people, our call must be for accountability, not only for the generals, but also for those states that sustain their fight. So let's use this conference that is planned and get all the relevant people on board and come to a solution. Thank you.
Mr. Assis, for 1 minute.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente. Sra. Comissária.
President, Commissioner, colleagues. For 2 years, the European Union has simply done nothing with regard to the atrocities going on in Sudan, and involuntarily this has led to certain results. This is currently the centre of suffering in the world, as the UN just said. Now, the war started in 2023, but the Parliament only adopted a resolution in 2025. It was the El Fasher massacre that finally got Europe and the world to move and to start talking about it. Now, the conflict is expanding and is really looking more and more like ethnic cleansing. We're seeing these terrible things happening, and the world needs to get together to punish those who are directly responsible for the violence, but also those who are making profits out of arms dealing, which are being used to massacre the Sudanese. The members of the UN Security Council need to suspend their differences and conclude this conflict. We should do everything possible to achieve that objective, because the alternative is that we will wake up one of these days in 2004 in Darfur or in 1994 in Rwanda. Thank you.
For 1 minute.
Colleagues, Commissioner, how many times more will we stand here and say we are concerned about Sudan while people are being slaughtered? Every day the reality becomes worse. Intensified fighting in Kordofan, new horrors in Darfur, no ceasefire in sight before the Ramadan, and growing foreign interference pushing Sudan towards regional collapse. Humanitarian aid matters, sanctions matter, but let us be clear, it's not enough. We demand an immediate ceasefire, more humanitarian aid, stronger and expanded sanctions. We demand real accountability for war crimes and human rights violations, and a credible civilian-led peace process. Finally, I repeat my call, as chair of the delegation to the Africa-European Parliamentarian Assembly, for a joint visit to Port Sudan and Khartoum, to witness the horrors ourselves, to talk to the victims and show that Europe will not look away. Sudan is burning. Our response must be powerful. Thank you very much.
Monsieur Satori.
21 million individuals face the threat of famine. Last week, a convoy of food delivering humanitarian aid was attacked by drone. We are seeing rape used every day as a weapon of war on both sides. What is happening in Sudan is not a domestic conflict. Its flames are being fueled by outside forces, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, on the one hand, and then the United Arab Emirates financing and arming the rapid support forces using European weapons, including French weapons. UN in 2025 talked about a massacre in El Fasher. And yet Europe stepped up exchanges and trade with Saudi Arabia. We need to immediately suspend negotiations. We need to use our full political clout to put an end to the involvement of the United Saudi Arabia.
Quand on évoque le Soudan ici,
when Sudan is talked about here, everyone wants to feel good about their conscience rather than having a sense of responsibility. It's being presented as a civil conflict, but this is in fact a war by proxy with the United Arab Emirates supporting the Rapid Support Forces. Then you have Egypt, Turkey and others supporting the Sudanese army. Sudan is a rich country. In the top 3 producers of the African continent, the 3rd biggest country in Africa, and a great deal of the world's maritime trade goes through the Sudan route. And yet, how can it be that such a rich country is at the heart of a crisis that is so terrible here? No one can really get the measure of it. 1 out of 5 people subject to forced displacement. Huge numbers of the population require humanitarian aid. Many thousands have been killed. That sense of responsibility that I talked about means that we need to go above and beyond pretending to do good. We need to look at the deep reasons behind this crisis, which could have been avoided. European countries are not neutral. They too have drawn benefits from Sudan. The embargo is still being bypassed, and Europe is offering impunity to those interfering in the country.
Mr. Lopatka.
What we see in Sudan today is the collapse of the state. For years, civilians have been paying the price through hunger, displacement, sexual violence, and the killing of thousands of people. More than an entire generation is being pushed to the brink, while humanitarian access is deliberately obstructed. Civilians are being actively targeted through attacks on hospitals or markets. External actors, state and non-state, that pursue their own strategic interests in Sudan are supplying weapons and financing armed groups. What should be the answer? Europe must therefore act with strategic clarity. First, by demanding an immediate and verifiable ceasefire with clear consequences for violations. Second, by using sanctions and accountability mechanism against those responsible, also against those external actors who enable them. And third, by supporting a civilian-led political future for Sudan, not as a distant aspiration, but as a condition for lasting peace. Together with the United States, the Gulf countries, we have to stop this humanitarian catastrophe.
Mr. Heide, for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, people are fleeing, being displaced, facing hunger, no end to war in Sudan. We had Darfur, El Fasher, and now we hear devastating reports from Kordofan. According to the United Nations, civilians are being killed in drone attacks, targeting markets, health centres, humanitarian routes. They are being deliberately targeted. International humanitarian law is being systematically violated by the RSF and the Sudanese army. Both sides must immediately halt attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. The European Parliament has set out clear demands: an immediate ceasefire, full humanitarian access, protection for women and children, and independent reporting to ensure that perpetrators can be held accountable. Meaningful action is now required. The EU must enforce the arms embargo, ensure targeted sanctions against perpetrators, ensure no foreign interference. Despite the political or economic interests at stake, Europe must use its full political clout. It cannot turn a blind eye.
Mr. Gorent, for 1 minute.
Thank you, President. The population in Sudan is going through a triple drama: security, first of all, development, and also humanitarian. The three dramas, all three, are of human origin and are man-made. We feel a lack of power. We talk about non-interference in third countries, and we have weak humanitarian means provided by the international community. Everything in this world is becoming transactional. Humanitarian and development budgets are shrinking. The EU and some countries in the world are trying to provide this help. If the others do nothing to put an end to this abominable situation, they could at least not deliver arms to the warring parties. This wouldn't make the conflict even worse. If the UAE have been pointed out, if you think that I'm pointing the finger at them, you're not wrong.
Lovin.
Herr talman, fru kommissionär.
President, Madam Commissioner, in Sudan, we have the worst humanitarian disaster taking place in the world. The UN and other organizations report about war crimes, and there are serious warnings that the attacks in Darfur are genocide. The EU is negotiating about a trade agreement with the UAE, which is supplying the warring parties, RSF, in weapons and logistics, and is therefore co-responsible for the violence continuing. In these turbulent times, the EU must find possibilities for new cooperation. But in our trade policy, there must be a limit of what is acceptable. In what is happening in Sudan, arbitrary killing, hunger, genocide. This goes beyond that border. And we've been talking about the UAE. We must postpone negotiation between, we've looked into war crimes, and we must see how, in the long term, the EU should position itself. A trade agreement with a country like that must be a simple decision.
On Saturday, an RSF drone attack murdered at least 24 people, including 8 children in the North Kordofan province. These people were refugees fleeing war and a humanitarian catastrophe. But this is only the latest in a series of drone attacks on humanitarian convoys, as violence in Sudan continues to escalate following the massacre at El Fasher in October. Right now, Sudan's health system is on the brink of collapse, and an estimated 33.7 million people, around two-thirds of the population, are expected to need humanitarian assistance in 2026. The EU must work to end this conflict and must hold to account those who are arming and fuelling this conflict, and this includes the United Arab Emirates, who the Commission seemed content to begin negotiations around a free trade agreement with, and who this Parliament lacked the courage to criticise in our last resolution on Sudan. Human rights should be non-negotiable, but more and more it seems that the EU is willing to trade those human rights away.
Mr. Stier, for 1 minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. President. Madam Commissioner, civil war between the SAF and RSF militia has been going on for over 1,000 days and has claimed tens of thousands of lives, and millions of people have been displaced. More than 270 million euros have been mobilized by the European Union in order to provide humanitarian aid. However, more needs to be done in order to stop the civil war. It is no secret that RSF is controlling gold mines, which are essential for controlling the war. Amnesty International talks about smuggling arms from Serbia, China, Turkey and United Arab Emirates. In Sudan there is a civil war, but also interference of regional factors and actors, including some other actors who want to get Sudanese gold. So you're right, Madam Commissioner, this is about proxy war, and this is deep-rooted cause of all suffering in Sudan. The EU will be able to address this conflict much better if it strengthens its geopolitical role in that part of the world, but we need to work on it further. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur. Thank you, President, Commissioner, honourable members. El Fasher faced a siege, and this was a real failure on the part of the international community. We saw a targeted massacre of civilians, famine, sexual violence, constant bombing. Words fail me to describe the humanitarian disaster that ensued. Thousands have been displaced, children dying of hunger, survivors with no access to health care. This is unjustifiable. Europe needs to step up, show international humanity and responsibility. We need to do everything within our power to protect civilians and guarantee proper humanitarian access, but we also need to properly punish perpetrators and step up pressure on foreign actors interfering in this war. We need to look at support for neighbouring countries like Chad. Commissioner, the measures that you announce are a step in the right direction. We need to stand by Sudan and support its people. Thank you.
Temido, for 1 minute.
Obrigada, Sr. Presidente, Sra. Comissária.
Thank you, President. Commissioner. Last November, backed by a large majority, we adopted a resolution on the escalation of the war and the humanitarian crisis in Sudan. 3 months on, the situation on the ground has only worsened. Millions of people have been displaced. There's famine, systematic sexual violence, and those attacks on humanitarian convoys happening with total impunity. Young people, children, the elderly, they're paying the price for this brutal war. Now, the resolution was adopted and humanitarian aid corridors should be opening. Sanctions must be put in place to enable the transition to a democratic government. That's what we wanted to happen, but none of that has really been implemented, and the international community has not done enough. It's not just about adopting resolutions, it's about taking action. Without action, these will just be words.
Gomez Lopez, 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I would like to remind you that what is happening in Sudan is not merely an armed conflict. It is war being waged on a civilian population. Hospitals are being destroyed. Humanitarian aid is being targeted. We are seeing hunger and children being robbed of their childhood. We are also seeing sexual violence used as a weapon of war, targeting women and girls. This is not collateral harm being done to civilian populations. It is a people, an entire people being terrorised. Commissioner, we need to do more. Europe cannot merely offer humanitarian aid. We need to take political action. We cannot condemn without upping the pressure on those responsible. We cannot allow total impunity. We have the tools available to impose sanctions. We need to do so. Use those tools. There is a human price being paid here by children. Thank you.
Matthias Nemeth, for 1 minute.
Spoštovani, razmere v Sudanu predstavljajo največjo humanitarno katastrofo in največjo krizo.
Ladies and gentlemen, the situation in Sudan is the greatest humanitarian disaster, and the conflict has already taken 200,000 lives. It's a moral defeat for the international community. The ICC has confirmed that there are witnesses to the worst war crimes and crimes against humanity. There's no end in sight either. That's a consequence of the rivalry of the warring parties and external parties being involved, and the UAE. The support of one side with weapons and money, it's a infringement of the UN embargo. Claiming to be a peacemaker is inhumane. So we call for a weapon embargo and sanctions for those who infringe it. We must have access for humanitarian aid for the civil population and protect them. And now is the time to act.
One request, Mr. Tinkinen.
Mr. President, for those of you who constantly search for racism where it isn't, hear this out. In Sudan, ethnically motivated violence against non-Arab people is happening on a scale that is hard to comprehend. Survivors speak about seeing piles of dead bodies in what they describe as an apocalyptic scene. Like the Day of Judgment, they said. We're not talking about mean comments online, which in themselves are enough to make some of you want to censor the entire internet. We're talking about mass atrocities committed on people based on the fact that they are black. This cannot and must not be swept under the carpet simply because the aggressor does not look a certain way. The ethnic violence in Sudan is a stain on humanity. Thank you.
Now we go back to the Commission. Madame la Commissaire, Habib, vous avez la parole.
Honourable members, let me thank you for your insights and your commitment during this debate. And I would like to close with 4 messages. First, the Sudanese crisis is of an unprecedented scale and it is continuing. Second, civilians are bearing the brunt of this crisis. They must be protected and humanitarian organisations must be given full, safe and unhindered access to those in need wherever they are. And 3, our support is vital to ease the suffering of the Sudanese people after almost 3 years of war. It must continue. And 4, we are about to enter in the 4th year of the conflict. The EU will stand with the people of Sudan, but they need peace. They need to resume their lives and their self-reliance. We must increase pressure on the parties to the conflict. Last week, the Council adopted the 6th package of sanctions against RSF and SAF-affiliated individuals. We must continue to increase pressure on the parties to the conflict and on those who support them. We need accountability to stop this devastating war. Anything less would mean accepting the normalisation of mass suffering, and it is something we will never do. Thank you.
So this debate is now closed. We move to the next item on our agenda. Următorul punct de pe ordinea de zi.
The next point on the agenda is a declaration of the Commission statement on the presentation of the action plan against cyberbullying. It's a very important topic, a topic of interest nowadays, and we are going to start our debate with a statement made by the Vice President of the Commission.
She just arrived. We have a long debate, so I kindly invite all speakers to respect the time that was made available to them, and hopefully